I went ahead and started the YouTube recording process just to get things rolling. Mayor Smith.
All right. Give Chantel another minute to 2 minutes and then we'll go.
Okay, David, rub it in that you're outside.
That's a good idea.
I'm so sick of the AC. I really hate AC. So I've been basically like working from outside just to, so yeah.
Well, I think we should probably get going because Chantel's often coming back from work at this time and may not be back yet.
I agree. So how about I will call to order this work session between the Housing Advisory Commission and Oxford City Council on July 21st, 2020. Mrs. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bracken?
Here.
Mr. Ellerby?
Here.
Mr. Prithridge?
Here.
Mr. Snavely?
I'm here.
Ms. Southard?
Here.
Mayor Smith?
Here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Snavely, seconded by Councilor Southard. May I have Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll to approve the agenda?
Mr. Ellerby? Mr. Prithridge?
Yes.
Mr. Snavely?
Yes.
Ms. Southard?
Yes.
Mr. Bracken?
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby?
Yes.
Mayor Smith?
Yes. All right, at this point, we're going to discuss proposed amendments to chapter 137 of the HAC.
Mike, you
Mr.
got a
Mayor, I
little
couldn't
bit-
hear that.
Yeah, we are going to begin discussion of the proposed amendments to chapter 137 of the HAC ordinance.
Could I just make a few comments before we get started there, Mike?
Sure.
Sure. What we included in the council pack, well, first off, let me welcome the HAC members to our joint work session with them. And then secondly, what we provided City Council and the HAC was a copy of the staff report that was prepared in February. And I wanted to have a discussion with City Council and the HAC on some of these recommendations. So if you have that in front of you, what I'd like for you to do is skip Exhibit A, which is the clean version. And on Exhibit B, you'll see the changes. Those that are marked out, we'd like to recommend eliminating. And then those that are being added are underlined. So I'd like to discuss those changes with you. I had a couple of concerns when this first came to me. I wanted to discuss with you. Number one, there was a recommendation to increase the number of commission members. And I felt that that might be a challenge for us since we have difficulty filling existing boards and commissions with the existing numbers. Also, there was a recommendation to basically allow non-residents to be on this HAC. And as you know, I don't favor that when we're making recommendations to City Council about things that affect the city of Oxford. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that too. So those were some of the concerns that I had. And then we also wanted to discuss the duties or the role of the HAC. And then you'll also see an attachment that's entitled the top 5 goals, which the HAC came up with. And so I just wanted to give you a little background before we get started. And Mike, I'll turn it back to you then.
Okay,
Okay, Mr. Mayor,
yes.
I prepared a PowerPoint, which has been distributed. In it, we talk a little bit about these points, but it gives us sort of an overall view of where HAC is at the moment and what we're looking at for the 5 points of focus. And I was wondering if you wanted to go through that PowerPoint first and then go back to discuss the individual issues, or if you prefer to discuss the individual issues and then have the PowerPoint at the end, which would sort of be backwards, but if that's the way you want to do it, that's fine.
I'm kind of thinking since we've got some pending changes to your charter, we should get through that first in case members of council have questions.
Okay, well, some of the questions could be answered with the PowerPoint. So that's up to you as to how you want to handle it.
Yeah, I'd rather get council questions on the individual changes first, if that's okay.
Fine.
So I didn't know if Sam or anybody wanted to lead these, or if you'd just like me to go through them.
I can also put the document on the screen
Okay.
for everyone, if that would be helpful. Would you like me to do that now, Mayor Smith?
Yeah, let's try that. Okay, and I'm going to tell everybody I've got really limited views as to everybody on the screen, so I may just have to have you speak up with your questions rather than have me recognize you, because I can only see about 6 or 7 of you on my screen. Okay.
That is the document that was in the packet that Ms. Eaton sent out. That shows the strikeout and underline that Mr. Elliott was referring to. So if council members have questions of the HAC, the members, and of course, Chair Sherry Land is here.
Hey, is there a page prior to this? Because this actually is our second page.
There you go.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's look at that first section there, the first change, where we would be asking to assist people in buying first-time homes, as well as provide education to home buyers and the community about the need for moderate to low-income housing. Any questions or concerns about that? All right.
Why are you not, are you not going to assist long-term residents? What's the reasoning for eliminating that line? Basically, we felt that, well, this goes back to what was in the PowerPoint. We felt that the definition of our duties and responsibilities fits better into providing education for home buyers and the community rather than assisting long-term residents.
Okay.
So is this missing some of the wording that we addressed yesterday that I brought up about sheltering
Yes,
between
it
me and
is.
Glenn?
Yes, it is. It didn't get put in.
Is that something we should discuss now?
Sam?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I thought we amended this to also include a general duty to shelter those in the community, period, in itself, because a lot of this is very specific and doesn't address the general need to make sure everybody has a roof over their head.
Yes, we had sort of focused on the two questions that were suggested in the joint work session agenda. The proposed amendments, meaning the questions that the city had about the composition of the membership. So that's basically what we had focused on. We are glad to answer questions about all these different changes that we're suggesting. But we had heard that the city was mainly concerned about the two questions that the city manager just brought up.
Well, when you say city, you should say city manager.
I'm sorry, Mr. Elliott.
Oh, that's okay. I just don't want anyone to infer that's watching this that, of course, we do have 2 council members, but basically that was my concern that I wanted to share with the full council. So, yeah.
All right, so my question back to Counselor Bracken was that going to be in addition to the first section?
It's going to be a replacement for item 5.
Okay, okay. All right. Well, we'll explore getting that in there at a later date. I guess at this point, rather than go through everything line by line, do I have questions specifically about sections from members of council? All right. Okay, then I think really we want to come back around to rationale for increasing the membership of the committee and possibly moving its membership from outside the city.
Would you like an explanation, Mr. Mayor, or would you like to wait for questions?
We can, it seems like I'm not seeing any immediate questions, so we could start with that.
All right,
Please.
sir. Basically what we had, oh, Glenn?
I was just gonna say, hey, Mike, before we get into those 2 specific points, could we just have Sherry run through that PowerPoint? I think it would be illuminating.
Okay, now I'm seeing some head nods on the PowerPoint, so let's do that.
All right, Sam? All right. You want to start with the first page, Sam? Okay. Beginning in 2019, the HAC sought to define its duties in order to better serve the city administration as well as city council. We began by looking at the Oxford Comprehensive Plan, where the following priorities were established, and you know those well from looking at the Comprehensive Plan of 2008. Next slide, Sam. The HAC then moved on to the codified purpose, duties, and composition in terms of office sections within the city code. After lengthy discussion and consideration in order to best serve the city and work within the comprehensive plan, we are asking for the proposed changes to the city code, which will reflect what we see as definitions and responsibilities that bring HAC to serve the city in a more beneficial way. In order to serve the city, we see as part of our responsibility to relieve the staff of some of the research and investigative work they currently do on issues regarding laws and regulation and other municipalities regarding housing issues. You will see examples of this as we move through the PowerPoint. Sam? We feel that the best way to do this would be to allow for our membership to increase from 7 members, 2 of whom are city council members and overwhelmed with work as it is, to 8 or 9 members. This way we could call on 1 or 2 additional members with specific expertise to help offload the staff with research and professional capabilities. While we have a very diverse commission with expertise in many areas, real estate professional, social worker working with our lower income residents, older adult facility administrator, librarian, and mixed methods evaluation researcher. Within 137.03A4, you will see that it is recommended that we have several specialty professionals not currently on the commission. As with some other city commissions, we might need to look outside the city limits for this expertise and would need to be able to have residences other than in the city of Oxford to take advantage of additional knowledge. And you have within that packet that was presented to you, the descriptions of the additional job descriptions that is on page 6 of the same packet that we were looking at before with the red and white corrections. Sam, next slide, please. Now we're talking about now the Housing Trust Fund. We've asked that the funds in the previous Housing Trust Fund be paid to the Family Resource Center to be allocated as follows. Quote, the commission understands that these funds will be used with the following guidelines in mind. 1, for rent payments. 2, to pay back rent to avoid eviction of tenant. 3, for deposits on leases. And 4, for temporary motel charges not to exceed 7 days. Considering the current COVID-19 crisis and the potential eviction crisis that will follow if low-income residents are not financially assisted, we felt that this organization would be the most direct pipeline to alleviate the needs of those affected. This will clear the way to allow us to set up a separate fund that will apply to goal number 3 of our top 5 goals of 2020. Next, Sam. Explore the Oxford Housing Commission top 5 goals for 2020. Number 1, explore drafting incentives requirements for assuring current and new housing programs remain affordable and are not converted to market rate by reserving and or preserving a percentage of units as affordable, i.e. set-asides, applied to discretionary approvals of residential developments, including planned developments and major subdivisions. One such incentive could be a density bonus. Shauna Rosenberg, who is a member of HAC, researched this extensively, discussed her findings with Sam and Zach, and helped to prepare the present Affordable Housing Incentives Report for the Oxford HAC at its meeting on June the 15th, 2020. This preliminary work saves staff time and research. Next slide, please, Sam. Number 2, explore drafting legislation that would penalize non-performing and or vacant commercial properties. Look into whether the definition of commercial properties can be expanded to cover investor-owned residential rental units being utilized as a business. Investigate reclassifying student housing from residential to commercial to ensure properties are performing, as well as the consideration of the mitigation of vacant rentals by having some type of fine or penalty related to above. This we have not yet addressed in HAC, but we have the rest of the year to take it up. Next slide, please, Sam. Number 3, explore creation of a home purchase assistance program and potentially recruit partners to ensure adequate resources, capacity, and administering such a program. This could be set up as a forgivable loan program where the balance owed goes away after a certain number of years or diminishes on a prorated basis. Referring to section 137.01 of the code defining purpose, section A3 is where we get our inspiration for replacement of the previous Housing Trust Fund. We are in the process of discussing an alternative for funding a replacement fund and how it should be structured. Next slide, please, Sam. Number 4, support the city's development of an RFP for the 47-acre Western Knolls property by defining site-specific goals which fulfill community needs, which should include a diversity of housing types and price points to ensure an increased supply of affordable units. Several of our commission members participated in the design charrette on November 13th, 2019, where we worked with others from diverse backgrounds to encourage a development plan that would include diverse housing, including that for low to moderate incomes. This is reflected in the resolution statement, quote, whereas this real property affords the opportunity to meet several housing objectives stated in the Oxford Comprehensive Plan, including the expansion of housing options for senior citizens, as well as the general populace, and providing diverse housing opportunities, end quote. Sam? Number 5, investigate in which the city could alleviate issues surrounding housing instability, housing assistance, and homelessness, including potentially exploring the development of a homeless shelter, or at the very least, finding an existing place that can support this function in some capacity. The dispersal of the current Housing Trust Fund monies helps to further this goal. Nicola Rodriguez and Sherry Lind are working with the Family Resource Center to develop a plan for a cold shelter here in Oxford in cooperation with other stakeholders. There's an anticipation of growing number of homeless, and if the evictions rise due to COVID-19 financial issues. And that's it. So if you want to go back to the discussion of the membership, we feel that since we are doing research for the city council and the city administration, and we have, as I said before, having two council members who are already overwhelmed on taking out 2 of the 7 we have, that leaves us with 5. We have additional people who are professionals who, if we could enlarge our membership numbers, we could have somebody who might be a builder, developer, property management manager of nonprofit housing that could give us expertise on that. A banker, an architect, someone who is a member of a minority organization. We have lots of people extra people we could choose from that would expand our base quite a bit. Even though we're fairly diverse as it is, this would expand our base quite a bit and give us a better group of people to work with to do the research that we would love to do to help the to advance affordable housing here in the city of Oxford. The point of having somebody who isn't a resident, there are at least one other commission that has somebody on it that is not a resident. The only issue we could find is to find somebody who would be a nonprofit housing builder or a for-profit housing builder might ask us to go outside the residence for the city of Oxford to find somebody who would be able to give us expertise in that area. That's why we're asking what we're asking. Is there anybody on the HAC that would like to make additional comments?
All right, council discussion.
Well, Steve noted in his chat that he's not getting audio. Are you able to get it now, Steve?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Mr. Ellerby.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to communicate to the rest of council. The reason why we're looking into the increase was specifically that we know that there are individuals that have the skill sets that we're looking for to add into the HAC. And we want to make sure that we can get the best applicants for those specific qualities. And that's why we wanted to both expand the total number, but this isn't like a massive expansion. We're looking at two spots. And we're not trying to fundamentally change the composition of the commission. So if there's some language that says, you know, the commission shouldn't be more comprised of more than some percentage of out of state, or not out of state, but out of city individuals, I don't think that would be a big deal. Like I think that is the main concern, but that was not the spirit of why we're asking to be able to access outside individuals.
Councilor Southard.
It would seem to me that it's of all the commissions and boards that we have, this one especially should perhaps be connected to the township. And so it would make sense perhaps to have somebody who does live, you know, does have the interests of the township as a participant in our community. So I just throw that out as an idea that unlike other commissions and boards, the relationship in housing, the relationship to the township is extremely important. And so that might be an argument to allow somebody to be on the commission who is not a member, who does not live within the city limits. basically, I'd like to know what you think of that thought.
So is that a question back to the chair?
Oh, to me? Oh, yes, I think that would be great. I agree with you that the township is actually, certainly in terms of housing and transportation, the township is sort of permanently linked to the city.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with the cooperation with the township. I also agree with what Councilor Ellerby said, that maybe if we do decide to allow members that are not residents of the city, that they be perhaps limited in number or limited to the townships. I think the concern is we don't want to all of a sudden have members, say, from Hamilton that are determining how Oxford tax dollars get spent. That, I think, was the concern, not that.
Mayor Smith, could I ask a question?
Sure.
If we have somebody who's a professional in nonprofit housing that lives in Hamilton, would that not be agreeable to you?
I'm kind of on the fence. It's like I can really appreciate the expertise. I mean, could they not come to the meetings and participate without being a member?
Yes, we've been lucky to have Mr. Mazer come and talk to us, so certainly we could have somebody come and talk.
Yeah, I think the issue that the mayor's raising is a good one, which is a voting member. And having those people participate sounds great to me. I'm maybe not being a voting member, though.
I like that idea a lot. Mr. Brackett.
Will that properly incentivize people to come out as experts every meeting and participate? Will that be enough for them?
I don't know. My gut tells me you're going to have trouble getting members anyway, because I don't know if we have people beating down the doors to get on any of our commissions. Even one as worthy as this. Councilor Ellerby. And then Mr.
I have a proposal after hearing everybody's comments. Does it seem reasonable to say if a member is or is a resident of the city of Oxford or Oxford Township, they would be a voting member. And if they're a member that is outside of that area, then they would be considered ex officio.
Yes, but should we also limit the number of ex officio members so we can still maintain a quorum of voting members?
Seems perfectly reasonable.
Okay. Mr. Schnabel, I see your hand raised. And then he froze.
Well, just to your point, Mayor, that we would be proposing spending tax dollars, and that certainly isn't within the purview of ours. We make recommendations to you as council, and you make those decisions. So I'm in favor of there being a limit to the number of outside non-city residents on the group. Just a thought.
No, and that's a good point too. I was kind of thinking that in the back of my head. So, okay. Mr. Prithridge.
Well, I have to say that I like the way it was worded in that it's 7 or up to 9. I mean, a real practical challenge is just finding good bodies to sit in the seats, and the practicalities of getting a commission together and scheduling. And I think that's what Mr. Elliott's just trying to, the economies that we can get. The fact is we're not locked. I think you need to have some odd number. So when there are votes, you don't end up with ties. But I think that I think it could be fine. I mean, I think that I don't think you want it to be bigger than you can keep it lean and mean and get the work done. But if you feel like there's an additional expertise necessary, I don't have an objection to that. I do think that there's ways to collaborate with people without having them be seated members on the commission too, which I know that you guys have done, and we've had people come in and talk to us and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with, I mean, as I've said on council before, like, it's my inclination that if there's a city resident, we should opt for that, like all other things being equal. But I can imagine that having someone from, neighborhood housing services or whatever they are in Hamilton, having someone at the table could be really good for us, and those connections could be good. Anyway.
Good points. All right, so let me see if I can sum up. I think council overall is in favor of additional expertise, but we would want to limit the voting powers of any additional members who are not in the city or township residents from being voting members. Did I sum that up correctly? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. Okay. All right. So do I have any other questions over any of the other changes? I'm not seeing any. I didn't have any. I thought they were all very reasonable and good cleanup changes to a 25-year-old ordinance. Why don't we move on? We had brief discussion of the Housing Trust Fund. Does any discussion about moving that to the Family Resource Center for their use? All right, I'm seeing thumbs up and head nods that seems to be, council seems to be in favor of that, as am I. Let's move on, talk about, I'm seeing Councilor Ragu's hand.
Would that mean that the fund is then closed once it moves over to the Family Resource Center?
Yes, this fund would be closed. We are looking to establish another opportunity to use for affordable housing work. Glenn, would you like to talk about how we've been thinking about that?
Yeah. So we actually discussed that the first time that this came up in front of council before. The current housing trust fund is a trust. And because it's a trust, it has some limiting factors to it. And that's what was causing a lot of the issues in which we brought that up to council, but we didn't explain it correctly the first time. So our overall goal is to move that money to the Family Resource Center so that it can be applied to, disaster relief or like virus relief and that kind of stuff because of the circumstances that we have right now. And then create a new, I believe it's called a special assessment fund. I know that Sam has the better terminology for that. And then that way we can have much more flexibility in how that account is funded, as well as having more control over where it can go.
Right.
And Shauna, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Well, I mean, it's just about the housing fund in general. Because I have all your ears, I'm really excited about the goals that we set for this year. And some of that could be developed to be funding sources for a new fund. In particular, if we were to get into place incentives for developers to create affordable housing in their developments and subdivisions, they have the opportunity for in lieu payments instead of creating that affordable housing for density bonuses or other incentives that I've discussed that we've all discussed in HAC. Also, another funding source that I think would be great, I'm going to put it out there. A lot of people have been talking about it, but the transient guest lodging, if we could get the hospitality tax applied to that, it would be great if some percentage of that would go to whatever fund we end up developing. And then for goal number 2, where we were talking about penalties or however it would, I'm not a finance person, but however we deal with non-performing commercial properties, vacant properties, that's another potential funding source. So I'm just really excited about creating a new fund that can then have all of these potential ways to fund it. So I just wanted to get out there that we do have these goals. We're seeing development occur in the city even as we're speaking. And it would be great if these policies were put into place as soon as possible in order to apply to those new developments. So I just, now that I have your ear, I just want to emphasize that there are things we are advising you on. And in fact, we did decide at our meeting before last to recommend to council that we do have transient guest lodging incur a hospitality tax. So just wanted to get those out there, that we really hope to have the support of council because we know that city staff is taxed, and we would like to see some of these goals that we've set move forward so that we can have developments, for instance, where perhaps affordable housing is built or we have funding.
Okay, I saw Councilor Ragu's hand, and then Councilor Bracken, and then Councilor Snavely.
Yeah, I love all those things that you said. That's really awesome. And that makes a lot of sense if this fund doesn't provide the flexibility to go
Yep.
towards the goals that we would do. And so how, like, what would the examples be that this is going to the Family Resource Center for COVID housing relief, but like, how do, like, where are those exactly going towards? And like, where's the transparency with that?
It was there when we agreed with Family Resource Center that the money would be used. The commission understands that these funds will be used for the following with the following guidelines in mind. 1, for rent payments. 2, to pay back rent to avoid eviction of a tenant. 3, for deposits on leases. And 4, for temporary motel charges not to exceed 7 days.
And then how would someone apply for it? Are there exceptions, or is it just anyone who they have to demonstrate that they were out of work because of COVID, or how is it?
Nicola, you want to address that?
You're still on mute, Nicole.
Muted.
I think we're talking about two different things here. There's the use of the $5,000, the $5,800 that's to be transferred one time, but then this new fund, I think it needs to be discussion about who would administer requests for it, and Family Resource, I would think, would be one obvious applicant on an annual basis, but I don't think it becomes an ongoing funding stream to one particular program.
Oh, I understood the question to be what the current funding money was going toward.
I think she's talking about I'm sorry, I misunderstood and was thinking about the newly proposed one and the funds that would be generated through the ideas that had been discussed. So both are, anyway, the two issues are interesting in their own right.
Nicola, did you want to talk about how
Yes, just to answer your question, everybody that comes through the Family Resource Center, anybody that gives us a call for financial assistance, there's a process that they go through, and we ask for documents on their current work status, any kind of pay stubs that they have. So we have a long conversation with the client to know where they are and what their future goals look like and their current situation. And there's also a federal poverty line that they have to meet in order to be eligible for the FRC assistance. So we make sure of all of that before we kind of commit to any kind of assistance. And if they don't qualify for the FRC assistance, then we find other resources for them.
And is there a drug, like substance abuse exemption, or where does it fall on that?
What do you mean by that? Can you explain?
Just wondering if there was like drug testing involved before people get assistance, or is it first policy?
We have not, done any. It's based on all the information that we get from them. So if they're in a recovery program, then we'll typically ask for a letter from the recovery program to make sure that they are in it. So there's an extensive interview that we'll conduct with each of them, but we don't do it any kind of background checks or drug testing at the resource center. But it's based on, you know, an extensive interview and any kind of information that we get from them.
Okay. All right. I saw Mr. Snavely's hand up.
I think Jason was next.
Okay, Jason, you still have Mr. Bracken?
Most of it was covered by Mrs. Rosenberg and others. I will just add that, you know, rental assistance and temporary housing is not something new to FRC. It's something they've been doing for a long time and have that process down, and I think do pretty well. But that's all I can add at this point.
Okay. Mr. Snavely?
Yeah, so I like Shauna's description of future uses and sources of funding. As far as the current amount of money, I understand that if there's needs in these areas, that they all seem to be reasonable uses for those funds. I guess my question is, there seems to be a desire just to eliminate the fund, and Glenn indicated there were some issues with the fund itself. If it's going to be eliminated, I'd like to know what's going to replace it, because the fund ought to be in the city. I don't think it should be in the nonprofit or in the HAC or anywhere else. It should be in the city, and then when there are proposals for use of that fund, then they would come to that. And maybe the city manager has an answer. I saw him raise his hand.
Yeah, let me just add to it. The trust fund doesn't have to go away. We could basically use it for other purposes spelled out, you know, in an ordinance. So it doesn't necessarily have to go away. Part of the problem that Joe and I had with the trust fund, typically a housing trust fund is set up with dedicated funds that, let's say, addresses affordable housing. And so it's usually an ongoing revenue source, a dedicated source of revenue. Our trust fund was established as an appropriation from the general fund monies to this for, you know, some pretty open purposes. And of course, some of the money, half the money, let's say, was used to help the can't think of the agency right now, to purchase a home in the Mile Square.
Community Foundation.
That's what I was searching for. Thank you, Steve. And then, of course, we have this remainder 5,000. So, you know, I think it's fine to go ahead and transfer that money over to the FRC during these trying times for the purposes that were spelled out. But we can leave that trust fund open as council discusses maybe a new dedicated source of revenue. And of course, it could also include, let's say, grants that we get from the federal or state government to use for, and I'll just throw out for affordable housing, even though I know that's a maybe just a limited purpose that you want to address. So, you know, that we don't necessarily have to eliminate that fund. You know, if it stays at zero for a long time, I'm sure Joe will ask us to do that, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, I'm seeing Councilor Prithich's hand.
So, I mean, never have so many people spent so much time talking about a fund that has no money coming into it, no money going out of it. So what I want is a fund that has money coming into it and money going out of it. So I think we've got I think that what we do is we need to look for dedicated sources. And we've spoken, for example, CDBG money that we've been spending on curb ramps. You know, affordable housing is a potentially legitimate use of that. It's not a local source, but you could imagine having a regular source of income, whether there's going to be CARES Act money or whatever that could be dedicated to housing. Let's maintain the fund and let's direct money to it. The second part of the challenge we've had is we've not really had a way to spend the money. We don't have a housing authority, you know, so the money's just sat there. but what we have is trusted partners that we can direct money towards. So I think that, for example, the Family Resource Center, we've started to build relationships with some of the nonprofit agencies across Butler County that also do this kind of work. And so what we need to do is, just like with anything else, I mean, I think this could establish a good template, which is, one could imagine, if rather than doing the work ourselves, directing money to a social service agency whose expertise is in providing support to people like the FRC does. And if we develop that good relationship, then that work can be done by them. So I think it's great. Yeah, I hope that what we do is the beginning of a pass-through role that maybe we have, and it's not the end of it. So I think we should maintain the trust fund, and we can solve Joe's problem by having it be an active fund. Then it won't be an accounting problem. So thank you to everybody for helping imagine this. I think it's a big priority for us, but we've been stuck on this for a while, and we got to figure out what the sources of revenue can be, and we got to figure out how to spend the money. So if we can do that, then we can start impacting housing in this way.
Fantastic summation, David. Perfect. Okay, I think we're all in agreement with that path. So
Yeah, we have our marching orders.
okay. Now, Edna?
Yes, I just wanted to point out, I mean, I think these are very good ideas. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. And I think this is a great solution. Keep the line, but transfer this amount of money right now. I also want to point out that there are other organizations in addition to the Family Resource Center. The SELF, which is, through Butler County, is more and more an organization that is involved in Oxford. That is, that we can involve ourselves in SELF, which is it does some of the same projects for Butler County in general. And that's an organization that is doing terrific work to help people and help with financial assistance and housing and needs. And so I don't want us to forget about SELF, because they're doing good work. I'm on the board of SELF, and I've been very impressed with what they're doing. And I just want us to keep SELF in mind as we continue to work on this very important work. Thanks.
Here, let me go to Councilor Prithrick, and then we'll come back around to you, Nicola.
So this is a question for the city manager in part, which is, I mean, a role that the commission could have is trying to figure out which partner agencies, some funding could go to and some kind of disbursement. I guess the question is, if we have money coming in and we have multiple agencies that are doing different pieces of the pie, how does council or the city manager staff allocate that money? And what role could a housing commission play in making some of those how to split the pie decisions? And how does it fit in the budgetary process, I guess, is my question.
Well, council has the final say on appropriations. So the Housing Advisory Commission could review agencies and make recommendations. Council could decide on a source of funding. You threw out a couple of examples. We could basically dedicate a new tax on the bed and breakfast, or something like that. And then within our, shall we say, enabling legislation, we'd want to spell out the uses of those monies for a dedicated, from that dedicated funding source. And, give yourself some flexibility, because one year you might focus on one agency doing something in affordable housing, and then one year you might want to focus on an agency that's focused on what was it, Jason, sheltering in place, focusing on homeless or something like that.
And I guess I think the HAC, that's a perfect role for the HAC to help us make those decisions at a time which then our budget could reflect those recommendations or deal with them.
Yeah, but if
foresee those coming to the budget work session, like we've done with some other kinds of issues. And if HAC looks at it ahead of time and makes some recommendations, we can take those into consideration and then make those annual appropriations, but it should be council making them.
Yes, you know, if it's our fund, council will make the appropriations. I agree, Bill.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. I was just going to turn our focus toward HAC's goals and see if council had any questions or any discussion of the goals. All right, I'm seeing no questions, so I'm going to take that as a thumbs up to proceed with your goals.
Thank you.
And if we don't have any other questions, comments, or concerns, I will just, oh, wait, I see Ms. Rodriguez.
Hand up, and so does Nicole.
No, I just wanted to say that we do work, the Family Resource Center works closely with the SELF organization, and we're very grateful for that collaboration. They mainly do assistance with utilities, and several of our clients have been helped through the program. But I think as far as rental assistance is concerned, if I'm not wrong, the Family Resource Center is kind of, one of a kind of organization that provides that rental assistance in Butler County. I know that there are other recent programs. There's a homeless coalition now that has come up with another program to help out with rental assistance. And we get a lot of calls from like Hamilton and Middletown, and we have to, let them know that our organization works only in the Talawanda School District. But I just wanted to kind of emphasize that the Family Resource Center is a very valuable organization and has helped many clients with the rent assistance, especially now during this pandemic. So I just wanted to make a comment on that.
That's great. Mr. Brithrick.
I guess I would just say that, some of the priorities we on the HAC talked about, and some of them predate the pandemic. I guess that if I had limited time, I think we're going to be in an emergency housing situation. And so thinking about penalizing businesses for vacancy uptown, or even thinking about set-asides, I think the development industry is going to slow down. So I think thinking about how to grab sources, whether it's CARES funding or whatever, to help assist people locally and some of those social services, I think that's really the next year or two is big structural changes. I think we're just going to have to help. I think it's going to be an emergency situation. So I'm super glad. And that's, if I were to focus, that's where I would put my energy.
Sherry.
We've been working on carrots rather than sticks, David, as you well know. If council sees a need for us to start looking outside for funding sources, we can certainly do that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank you all for your time on the commission and what you've put in here lately. You've really given this commission some traction and some teeth, which it has lacked for a long time. So I really appreciate that. And I think you guys are doing a great job and we're moving in the right direction. So let me see if I need an official motion to adjourn the work session.
I'll move it.
Moved by Mr. Snavely, second by Mr. Prithrick. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll to adjourn the work session?
Mary Ann, you're muted.
Okay. Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yeah.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right. We are adjourned.
So Mayor, I'm going to keep the meeting open. So please, everyone, stay connected. Feel free to turn off your cameras and your mics and all that. I'm just going to pop up a slide that says council's in recess.
Perfect.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mayor Smith and council, for giving us this opportunity.
No, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
How's it going? Hi, Doug.
Hello, Matt and Tom.
Nice to meet you virtually.
Yes. Thank you as well.
Thank
Tom
you.
and I are longtime acquaintances, so we don't need to virtually shake hands.
That's great. I've had the pleasure of knowing Tom for, I don't know, probably going on a year now, I guess. And he's definitely a good friend to have, good person to have a business relationship with and even a personal relationship with.
Yeah. How much did that cost you, Tom?
I have no idea, but it will be a lot to pay back for sure.
Yeah, right. I'll catch you at High Grain.
Sure.
No, I agree. And thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Doug, for having us.
Yes, thank you, for sure.
So Tom, are you guys still doing virtual meetings in Silverton?
So the oldest member of my council is 87 and doesn't have a computer. And so we have been doing our meetings at a park at noon with social distancing and masks.
So I take it you don't have term limits there? I'm teasing.
The newest member of my council has been on council for only 10 years.
Wow.
The mayor was on council in 1994 for 2 years, off for 2 years, and then on continuously since.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I did share with Tom that we have term limits here in Oxford. I've been in other communities where we didn't have term limits, and there's
Yeah.
pluses and minuses.
Sure.
And,
We have some counselors with some pretty deep experience, going back a little while.
yeah, they sometimes go off, move away, and come back and get back on.
Right. Great.
Where's Bill? I don't see Bill.
1980.
There he is. I had a mayor in Somersworth that basically said we have term limits. It's called, if you don't like what we're doing, vote us out of office. And he was there longer than I was, and I was there 14 years when I moved. So,
Wow. They were doing something right.
So everyone, hi. I just want to let you know that we are still live streaming, whereas before we normally have like a little window of time. But we're live streaming right now, and whatever Mayor Smith is ready, we're already live and ready.
Okay,
Great.
give me about 1 minute and we'll begin.
Thank you.
All right, I've got 7:30. Although I'm still not seeing Counselor Ellerby. There he is, okay. I would like to call the July 21st, 2020 Oxford City Council meeting to order. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Ragu?
Here.
Mr. Snavely?
I'm here.
Ms. Southard?
Here.
Mr. Bracken?
Here.
Mr. Ellerby?
Here.
Mr. Prithridge?
Here.
Mayor Smith?
Here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Snavely, second.
Seconded.
Second by Counselor Southard. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll to approve the agenda?
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
yes,
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right. Tonight, we're going to begin with a presentation of a solar project in the village of Silverton. And we have with us Mr. Tom Carroll, the city manager of Silverton. We appreciate you coming out tonight. And I believe Mr. Matt Kolinsky. So I will turn this over to you, sir.
Great. Well, thank you. So I want to thank everybody for your time tonight. I know you guys probably have a lot of different things on your schedule considering the world we live in, but we certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about the project that we did for the village of Silverton. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and get started. And then Tom, if you want to chime in on some of the specifics and maybe even some of the financing, that would be great. And if you want, Tom, do you want to maybe start and just talk about real quick about how you guys came to view putting solar on your village building?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to speak to you. Just a quick bit of background. Silverton is right outside of Cincinnati. We're a first suburb of the city of Cincinnati. If you've ever been to Kenwood Mall, you have either been through or near Silverton. So just give you a sense of bearing. We are a village. We're just under 5,000 people. We are a minority majority community with what I would describe as a working class and a middle class community. And we generally have a council that I would consider to be progressive and forward leaning on a variety of issues. In 2018, just a couple years ago, we entered into an agreement with a craft brewery to move into our old municipal building, old being 1951. And in order to make room for them, we actually bought and renovated a funeral home, which was in foreclosure. And we renovated that funeral home to make that our town hall. And as part of that project, which was about a $2.2 million project, we spent about 10% of that project cost, or a little under $250,000, putting in a geothermal heating and cooling system, which was very economical for us. It was about $100,000 cost increase over the mechanical and heating system that we would have put in. That was just a high energy efficient traditional or conventional system. So the $100,000 of additional cost, we figure pays for itself in about 3 years on that particular energy improvement. And nevertheless, we were still spending money on electricity. We went from spending about $30,000 a year in our old municipal building on electricity and natural gas to spending about $10,000 a year in our new building once we had renovated it and put in the geothermal system. Most of our cost for the new town hall electricity is lighting and computers. The geothermal system, by my estimate, costs us about $1 a day to heat and cool our building, which is a 6,000 square foot town hall building and a 24-hour building. But nevertheless, council wasn't really satisfied with still spending $10,000 a year on electricity, as well as still generating that carbon. So last year we explored and decided to put a solar array. Matt will walk you through that system and some of the particulars, but basically we came up with a $100,000 budget and said, how much power can we get for $100,000 on our municipal building? We also, at the same time, decided to replace all of our streetlights, our nighttime streetlights with LED lights. We have Duke Energy, they're our provider, and so we spent $160,000 starting in January and completing it in early February to replace 316 streetlights with LED lights. So between those two expenses, the village spent $100,000 on the solar array and $160,000 on the LED light replacement. Both of these expenses were paid for in 2020. They were budgeted in 2019, but carried over and encumbered into this fiscal year. I should say that if you add those two together, you get $260,000. We did receive a $10,000 grant from OKI, our regional planning, metropolitan planning entity. And so to be candid about the village's expense, it was just under $250,000. We last year borrowed $250,000 for various projects, and we borrowed that money at between 3.25% and 3.5% for 10 years. And I can get into the finer details of the costs for that $250,000, but essentially the energy savings from the LEDs and the solar will pay for the debt service in 11 years. In other words, we're going to save between $27,000 and $28,000 a year in energy consumption between the LED and the solar panels. And our debt service is going to be about $31,000 a year on that $250,000. So in other words, in 11 years, the two projects, the LED and the solar, will pay for themselves. We are also, we would have accepted a longer return on investment because we believe in energy efficiency, but on a purely economical basis, a purely financial basis for us, in our context, and given what we were paying for streetlights, this was a good business decision for Silverton. We have other sustainability efforts that I'd be happy to talk about. We buy all of our electricity for the village is 100% renewable. We also have a residential electric aggregation program. I believe Oxford does as well, from what I understand from Doug. And we only offer renewable energy for that. I should say that this is we started our third round of the aggregation program in May of this year. The prior 2 terms that we offered it, we did not offer a renewable solution. My understanding is Oxford has offered that for longer than we have. So credit to the city of Oxford. We're also pushing recycling. We raised our recycling rate from 6% to just under 20% last year in 2 years. And we're starting to buy hybrid and energy efficient vehicles. I couldn't convince my council to invest in a Tesla for our police car. That's still a little cutting edge. We tried, but they flagged that one and said, no, thank you. So we just bought a Ford Explorer hybrid. And with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to Matt or answer any specific questions council may have.
Does anybody have any questions? Thank you,
look.
Thomas. Certainly appreciate that. So if we could go ahead and get started. So Village of Silverton, we put on a 40.2 kW solar array. You could go to the next slide, please.
Sam, is that you? Is it on your screen? Can you click through? Oh.
It's a great PowerPoint. You have to trust it.
Right, exactly.
Sam, are you working on resharing it?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. So Tom was just talking about their system. They were figuring around an 11-year payback. So any tier 1 solar panel that would be installed, which is the only product that we use, has a 25-year warranty. So it has a 25-year production warranty. So essentially, Tom and the Village of Silverton, instead of renting electricity every year from Duke Energy, it's just like renting an apartment. They bought their own house. They bought their own solar generating station. So as you can see by the pictures here, that specific system, we use black frame panels, black racking. It's a 25-year warranty on the panels. So essentially, the Village of Silverton paid for 25 years of power, but it only cost the Village of Silverton 11 years. So in other words, they bought 11 and got 14 years free. So just simple math, assuming the cost of energy doesn't increase, which the average is about 3% per year. Without any multipliers, the Village of Silverton's going to save about $400,000 by this investment. So Sam, if you could go to, I'm sorry, thank you. So for this specific project, we commissioned the job late March or early April. We put the PowerPoint together in May. We used black frame panels, black racking, so you can see it blends in really nice with the roof. So again, my name's Matt Kolbinski. I'm with Pro Lighting and Solar. I did the design and I also managed the project all the way through. This particular project, we used a large local electrical contractor, ESI Electric. They're based in Cincinnati. They've been here since 1966. They have offices in Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland. And they have around 450 electricians employed in the state of Ohio. Very, very solid company. They've done huge jobs. So Union Terminal, Music Hall, different stadiums at University of Cincinnati. They are IBEW NECA contractor. All their electricians are part of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So we use local labor to do all of our projects. Could we go to the next slide, please, Sam? So for this particular roof, Tom put they put a new shingled roof on. So we used a RAQ racking system and we opted for the black frame. And as you can see by the system itself, that everything blends into the roof very nicely. This was a shingled roof attachment. All this product is made in America. The flashing, everything is made. The steel's pressed in Kentucky and the components are put together in Michigan. So and there's a 25-year warranty on this product as well. Next slide, please, Sam. So this just shows you the system itself, the layout of the racking. You know, this system was pretty easy to put on. We just had a lot of different parts and pieces because we didn't have just a flat roof to put it on. So it took a little bit longer to do it, but I'd like to think the end product it's a really good project. Next slide, please, Sam. So the modules we used, they're Helene 365 watt black frame solar panels. There are 110 solar panels. And again, you can see by the pictures that the solar array, it really blends into the roof and looks very nice. These modules are all made in America. Their plant is in Minnesota. And this specific manufacturer, they just received an award from PVEL as a 2020 top performer for reliability, which is what we're looking at when anybody that we put a solar array in for. It's a long-term investment. So we want to use good, high quality, made in America components. Any questions at this point? Next slide, please, Sam. So the inverters are Solar Edge inverters. We use 3 11.4 kW and 1 6 kW inverter. You can see everything looks really nice. It pays to have professionals do the work because it's done right the first time and you don't have to worry about it. And from my standpoint as a project manager, I don't have to babysit. So it's kind of nice. They spoil me. Next slide, please. So this is a grid-tied system. So basically the way it works is the sun shines on the solar panels, it generates direct current. every house or business in the United States is ran on alternating current. We had to have a means to convert the direct current to alternating current. And that's where we have the Solar Edge optimizers on the back of the solar panels. They go to the inverters. It goes out to this disconnect switch, which ties into the meter. And this also serves as a means of disconnect for Duke Energy, for the local firefighting company. So it's just a standard grid tied system. Basically, the way it works is Tom uses everything they consume. Any additional power goes back onto the grid, and it basically clocks. So it basically works like an odometer. So if they put 10 kilowatt hours back on the grid today, as soon as it gets dark, the first 10 kilowatt hours that they consume are what they already put back onto the grid. So it's very simple. Next slide, please. So this is a shot from the monitoring that Tom has. We use Solar Edge. Solar Edge has an excellent monitoring service. Their products all rated for a 25-year warranty as well. So you can see here the energy production, and it gives you the production. It updates about every 15 minutes. You can see at the very top right-hand corner, the peak power is 42 kW, has all the weather. On the left, it has your production and your days of production. On the right-hand side at the bottom are your environmental benefits. So they've saved almost 30,000 pounds of CO2. And since we commissioned the array the end of March, it's the equivalent of planting almost 222 trees. So it's really a good thing financially, but then when you look at the environmental impacts, it kind of makes it easy. Next, does anybody have any questions? Next slide, please, Sam. So as Tom mentioned, they have a 6,000 square foot facility. Their consumption was around 40 to 41,000 annual kilowatt hours. One of the things that we looked at when we went and looked at the project initially is they had already done the upgrades, they had LED lights, but they didn't have any occupancy sensors. So when we put our quote together, we had a budget price, but we were pretty decent amount under our budget. So I made the suggestion to Tom that we add in deleting all the light switches and putting in occupancy sensors throughout their building. And we were still under budget. So that was part of our proposal, that we would get rid of all the light switches, put in occupancy sensors, and put in 110 solar panels, which is going to give them between 45,000 and 48,000 annual kilowatt hours generated from this specific project. Does anybody have any questions? If you want to go to the next slide. So this is just my contact information, Tom's contact information. I'd like to just thank everybody for allowing us the time to go over this project. It's pretty exciting for, no offense, Tom, for a little village in Cincinnati to be able to do this and say, we don't pay Duke Energy anymore. We've bought our own power. We're not renting anymore. So kudos to you, Tom. And I'll open it up if anybody has any questions.
Questions? I'm seeing Councilor Bracken.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you. Everything the city's doing and you're a part of is fantastic. I would love if Oxford goes that direction. But I had two big questions, and one is sort of about the possibility of doing a co-op. So if Oxford were to purchase in large quantity solar arrays, would it be possible to spread that bulk purchase savings to individual citizens? Does that make sense? So if the city agrees to buy a large amount of solar arrays, could those savings be passed on to individual residents for their own homes on the rooftop?
So the way it works right now in Ohio, Duke is only going to allow you to take that power back to a specific meter. So if we put a large system somewhere, it would go in to offset the consumption for that specific building. But our team was chosen by the Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance to do a Solarize Cincinnati program. and it's specifically for residential customers, and it's a group buy-in. So basically the way it works is if we have 25 houses we're going to put solar on, we could be at $3 a watt install price. If we have 50 houses, we could be at $2.95 a watt install price. So it's kind of two different things. I see where you're going with this, but we're not really set up from the utility standpoint in Ohio to do that quite yet. But the Solarize program is something we could do as early as tomorrow. We could start a Solarize Oxford campaign.
And the city in that case couldn't also just be an additional buyer, almost as if a resident just buying a lot more?
Yeah, so the way it would work, and I'll give you a real quick, for instance, we just put a proposal together for the city of Wyoming, and they have 5 different buildings that we're pitching to put solar on. We're going to do LED lighting, occupancy sensors, and solar. And that would be because it's such a large project. Obviously, there's a significant reduction in the overall investment and the overall cost of installation. So that's how I would try to look at things from the perspective of the city of Oxford is, okay, what are the places what are our loads? Where are we using the most electricity? Do we have LED lighting there? Do we have occupancy sensors? If you don't, that's an easy place to start. It's low hanging fruit. And then we could put that together to help buy down the payback of the investment of installing solar.
So my other big question was, and thank you for those answers, very informative.
Thank you.
Is it possible when we generate more electricity than we need and we put it back to the grid, that energy could be purchased by a renewable aggregation purchase agreement, and then those savings passed on to residents directly in some way?
So that's a great question. The way it works in Ohio with Duke Energy is they're only going to give you about 3 cents a kilowatt hour for what you overproduce. So they're not going to give you a fair market value because they don't have to. So I'm sorry, but that's the way it works. They have a monopoly on power, and until you do like Tom or do like I've done at my house, installing your own energy generating facility, you're kind of beholden to them.
Yeah, so direct use would be much more useful there. Yes. And that's a shame on Ohio for not incentivizing this, but thank you for that information.
Well, unfortunately, we incentivize nuclear power and coal still. We're going to catch up eventually, I know it. There was an old Mark Twain quote that he wants to be in Cincinnati when the world ends because everything happens here 10 years later. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So, thank you.
But if Silverton can do this, anybody can do it realistically. Yeah.
Okay, I saw Councilor Ragu's hand and then Councilor Prithridge.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jason, you stole one of my questions. And I think that's what's so exciting about the idea of solarizing Oxford is that it could essentially be at no cost to the city. That could be something that if we just had, how many homes would we need to do a project like this, you said?
We could start small and I would say probably around 25.
Yeah, and it's so feasible. And I feel like there's so much enthusiasm and momentum for this. I know Doug was talking about this really cool idea of putting a solar array on the landfill. And so is that something that you know anything about or like feasibility of, or?
So that's a great question. So as far as landfills, our team was chosen by the city of Cincinnati for their large solar aggregate that they're eventually going to install. But one of the projects was a Center Hill landfill, and it was around 16 megawatts. So it was almost 44,000 solar panels. So it's a long process to put it on a landfill. With soil samples and a lot of other things. But there are also some grants out there. There are brownfield development grants. So there are a lot of ways to source the financing of this. And we're open to any means that we can to help finance the project. We are getting ready to install a 72 kilowatt system, which is 196 panels for a construction company over in basically Hamilton. And they are in a REAP zone. So they qualified for a USDA grant. So the USDA is going to give them $40,000 to put solar at their facility, which will net zero their facility. So there's a 26% investment tax credit for a for-profit entity, commercial entity, and then there's a 25% USDA grant. So basically, they're going to pay 49% instead of 100% to net zero their facility. We've already done LED lighting, we've done the sensors. The last thing is putting solar on. So the landfill is more of a long-term project. It's not something we could just flip a switch on like the Solarize campaign, but it is something that's certainly doable. And it's, you know, there have been a lot of landfill solar projects and the technology's there to do it. Yes. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilor Prithridge.
So I want to thank you guys for sharing your experience. My question is for Mr. Carroll. When you were looking at this, did you look back and forth between the idea of purchasing and owning versus like Cincinnati is entering into a purchase power agreement with a third-party provider? In part I asked because I think in Oxford, I mean, there's individual building scale. Our municipal building is not our energy consumer. We have a sewage treatment plant and that's where the equipment's running. Did you run the numbers on those two options, either like the high upfront cost, but you save money on the back end versus some fixed rate? Did you run those kind of numbers when you were looking at this?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. We did, and at the end of the day, there wasn't a huge difference, but we felt like the benefit for Silverton would be to go ahead and make the investment. The conviction is that the long-term benefit of, as Matt described it, owning your own power supply rather than renting. With a purchase of power agreement, you are still renting. You're just renting it from a different entity other than Duke. Right. And so we liked the idea of owning our own asset long term. We will have to wait 25 years to find out if that proves prudent, but I think based on the solar guarantee that we have from the provider, that it's going to be a safe bet.
So if I could just follow up with a question, Mr. Dreisbach probably knows this off the top of his head. What's our total kilowatt hour consumption in the city of Oxford on it? We're a ballpark number. So if we wanted to go neutral on all our facilities, how many rooftops are we talking about? Because that could, you know, it costs $100,000 for 40 kilowatt hours. Is that correct? Ballpark?
40 kilowatts.
So yeah, what's our annual consumption, Mike?
We're a plus or minus 5 million kilowatt hours.
5 million.
So then you think about, again, it's the upfront cost of how you finance that versus the long-term savings. And I hope we look at that, but that's just, and hopefully there's the economies of scale. We have Miami is, I don't know what Miami's consumption rates are, but they're vast also. So anyway, yeah, I think it's all great food for thought, and I hope we can figure out the most cost-effective way to get to zero.
Yeah. So can I add something real quick? Thank you. So I think when we did the numbers for Wyoming, I think they were about 2.5 million. So they're about half the size. And we were looking at about 0.5 megawatt of solar. And so, and that wasn't 100% offset. But that would put a big dent in it. Their biggest energy consumers were their water treatment plant and their outdoor lights. So again, you know, the thing that separates us from a lot of other people that do what we do, you know, I'm a union electrician by trade. I went through the apprenticeship program. So I'm viewing things from the standpoint of let's reduce your consumption and then let's figure out the best size system after we've reduced your consumption. I'll give you a very quick, for instance, we're working with the city of Moscow, or the village of Moscow, Ohio. And initially we were going to put in 100 kW solar array, which would have net zeroed them out. But after we went in and did our audit, they have old lighting everywhere. They don't have any occupancy. They have some occupancy sensors. So after we did our lighting audit, we took that 100 kW system. Now we can do an 85 kW system that will net zero them if we do the lighting. So the savings of going from 100 kW to 85 kW would pay for the LED lighting upgrades. And that doesn't even include the LED savings and the money from Duke Energy. So, you know, the best approach is reduce your consumption as much as you can and then size the solar array. Yeah.
Wait, I see I have Councillor Southard, then we'll come back to Mr. Snavely.
Yeah, I have solar panels on my house. And
Right on.
yes, and I also have a solar edge inverter, so that's very familiar. And there were tax incentives when I did this 5 years ago, that it actually cost me half. It basically paid for half of what I paid for the panels. And I think one thing you have to consider, your situation in Silverton is perfect because you have a building there with slanted roofs and no trees around that I could tell, right? You've got no trees?
We planted new ones, but you're right. They're very small at this point.
And a roof has a lifespan of 25 years about, so you have to take that into account as well. So when the roof goes, the solar panels have to be taken off and a new roof put on and so on. So I think that the idea of doing it in a field is much more effective would be more effective for Oxford because we all have a lot of trees around. Certainly our city building is surrounded by trees. And it's also a flat roof, which makes it more difficult. The southern exposure works so much better. You had a southern exposure there, I think. And so, yours is very effective. So all those things are things that have to be factored in. And, it's more than just making, of course, we're paying tax dollars. So we are most very concerned about the efficiency, and the tax dollars that we're spending. But when a person does it for their own home, they're doing it for a variety of reasons and not just for the money. It's also about the importance of saving energy and making a statement. So all these things have to be factored in, and I think it's very exciting to see what you've done in Silverton and to hear what you're going to be doing in other places. And I look forward eventually to the possibility of doing it on the landfill here, because I think that seems to be much more effective here, especially with our state, which does not incentivize these things. And we do have many, many cloudy days. So that's another issue, right? The fact that I wish the Sunshine State, Florida, would incentivize solar panels, but they don't. That's, it's a shame that this is not more of a national, national movement to really use the sun where it is and not pose it in areas where it's not, which is here. We're in the Miami Valley, which is many cloudy days and rainy days, and that has to be taken into account too. But I think this is fascinating, and I think you've done something very interesting there.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snavely.
Yeah. I just my questions are really more for city staff. I want to thank both of our presenters. You did a fabulous job. And I know many of us here on council actually ran on moving us forward with solar. So it's very timely. And so I was wondering if we could get a report from Mike on what is the status of LEDs on our streetlights? Do we have any LEDs, or how extensive is that?
We have retrofitted all of the streetlights on K Wrench Drive and the Oxford Community Park. Those are all LED. We're in the process of converting all of the Uptown Park architectural streetlights to LED. And we also have a line item in the CIP plan, I believe it's for next year, to replace all of the streetlights in Oxford with LED.
Okay, I think that'll be a really good start. We have the movement sensors and the renovated buildings. So that's a good start as well. So I guess my question for Doug and for staff is how we get started. If it is the will of council to move forward, I'd like us to move forward. And what is it that we need to do to start that ball rolling? Because I don't want to just always talk about it in the future. We need to get it moving.
You know, I think we can discuss this further at our upcoming goal setting session and certainly in the CIP. I mean, we're working on the project at the landfill and really see a lot of merit to that. You know, it's a much bigger project.
Yeah.
You know, but.
And can we also think about potential, at least to examine the potential for solar panels on the water treatment plant and the sewer plant, or an array in that area, because there's a wide open area at the sewer plant too.
There is, but you know, this is going to be a challenging year for us next year. So we're going to have to prioritize our capital spending because I mean, I'm not sure what a project like this, how much of it was engineering and how much of it was capital cost, but you are going to have some engineering costs on those. But certainly, you know, we're committed to doing these projects. I mean, probably about 5 years ago, we changed out all the pumps and saved a lot of money there as well. So that gets back to Matt's comment about the big thing you want to do is reduce your consumption. And we've been focused on that. And so now we need to take the next step.
I appreciate it.
I've got one maybe last question for Mr. Carroll. I was thinking about timeline wise from conception to installation. Do you have a ballpark? Was it a year or 6 months or?
So I would say it was two years from let's start looking at this seriously to Mr. Snavely's point about what do we do in the short term. It was 2 years from when we started with that type of question to when we had the solar array on the roof. That was just our timing. That was all pre-COVID, so that changes everything. And but you know, we started, I would say we started looking at it very earnestly and developing a bid specifications probably about a year ago, and the bidding and financing and getting all the council approvals was in the neighborhood of 6 months. So I would say we basically went from let's get really serious, we figured out the feasibility, let's do this. It was about 6 months, the second half of last year from the time where we were awarding the contract to Matt's company.
Great.
And from if I can, from a timeline as far as the permitting and inspections, installation was maybe a couple months. So it was roughly 2 months to basically do all the work, and that was in the dead of winter. So we had some days that we couldn't work outside because of the weather. So it's really pretty easy. And if I can, as far as Wyoming, when they asked us to look at this, it took me a couple months to do all my audits and put all the data together. And I had several different contractors that I work with. I work with small businesses and women-owned businesses. So what I try to do when I put these projects together is I try to get the most efficient contractor for that specific task to bid that specific portion of the job. So like for Wyoming, the street lighting, I was going to use Riverside Electric. The lighting retrofit work and the small solar, I was going to use a woman-owned business, Path Electric, and the big solar, I was going to use the company we used with Silverton, ESI Electric. So when I look at a project, I try to break it down in the most efficient pieces that I can. So thank you again.
Councilor Bracken?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that while budgets will be tight with this downturn, now is the time to invest. What you want in downturns is counter-cyclical investment, and now's when you get the cheapest interest rates to borrow against when necessary. And we know that fiscally over the long term, this makes sense. it totally makes sense. It's just a matter of paying it off up front and getting those savings in the end. And so I would argue this makes us more stable going forward. But I did have another specific question going back to the panels themselves. Does it make sense? Do you guys do any battery storage? Does it make sense if you don't reach 100% coverage, or because there's such a reduced rate of return in selling it back to the grid, does battery storage ever make sense?
Yes, so that's a great question. So we just commissioned a project in Sharonville. It's a 117 kilowatt system. It's about 320 solar panels. And we have an energy storage unit on that facility. It's a net zero facility, but they really wanted energy storage. So the way we have that system set up, all of their computers and night lights are on the storage system. So basically at night, if they're working in the office, everything's powered off the energy storage unit. Energy storage has come a long way with lithium ion. So things are getting where from a scale standpoint, it makes sense. Normally where we are, you don't see a lot of storage. Normally you're going to see it where they have tiered rates. Like San Diego, they have 3 different rates of the cost of energy. And so most people are going to use the stored energy when they're paying 44 cents a kilowatt hour instead of 24 cents. Because we subsidize coal here in the state of Ohio, our rates are significantly lower than that. So the storage component is less cost effective because of that. But it's still something, like for that specific customer, they really wanted a small energy storage unit. So we put one in. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm seeing no more questions, so thank you both for coming. That was a great presentation. I think
Thank
we-
you, really appreciate it.
And
Okay, have a good night.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Thanks for coming.
Yep, take care.
All right, now we're going to move into a public hearing on the dissolution of residential permit parking zone on East Chestnut from Oak Street to Patterson Avenue. May I have a motion to enter into public hearing?
I so move.
Second, moved by Mr. Snavely, second by Mr. Prithrick. Ms. Eaton, may I have a, make sure I get this right, roll call to enter into public hearing.
Miss Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. Right, I will turn this over to Mr. Dreisbach, and I want to compliment you on your background.
Mayor
All right.
Smith, I have
Yes.
a question.
Yes.
Maybe Mr. Dreisbach can answer. We have a couple public comments on this topic, and I don't know if they should be during the public hearing or during the resolution reading.
I think they could be in either place. We could do the public hearing and then hear the comments during the actual voting of the resolution, unless our public commenters have any strong objections to that.
I think that's fine. I just wanted to know.
Okay.
I'd like to hear.
Thank
that.
you.
Okay. Mr. Dreisbach.
All right, thank you, Your Honor, members of council. We are wrapping up our street resurfacing program for this year. And one of the streets that was being resurfaced and having a lot of base repairs was East Chestnut Street. Because City Council in 2005 established a residential permitted parking zone on this street, we need to get guidance from the City Council on how we restripe this street. Since 2005, Council has enacted a complete street policy. And so whenever we resurface or construct new infrastructure, we try to maximize that asset for all users of the roadway. I've got a very brief presentation, if I could share that with you, hopefully. 1 second. All right, thank you for your patience. Okay, is that sharing properly for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So again, just a reminder of our complete street policy, and the yellow line, the yellow east-west line at the bottom of the screen is Chestnut Street. So when this was passed back in 2014, about 7 years ago, Chestnut was intended to have sharrows. Sharrows being just a reminder that this is a shared use roadway for vehicles and bicycles. Since that time, Council has reinstituted the Oxford Parking and Transportation Advisory Board. They met and discussed this topic at length. Many different scenarios were studied, discussed, and debated as to how best to accommodate all the users on this roadway and make it as safe as possible for everyone that's going to use East Chestnut Street. They came out with 4 recommendations. The one concerning bike lanes, which is what we need council's opinion on tonight, is shall parking in this residential permitted parking zone be removed to make room for dedicated bike lanes. In this case, I have a couple drawings. This is Chestnut how it is today. It's only 35 feet wide. It will accommodate 2 Butler County Transit buses in the travel lanes. And parking is actually somewhat tight with 2 lanes of parking on the north and south curbs. What the Transportation Board has recommended is removing all of the parking from East Chestnut, from Oak to Patterson. This would allow for comfortable driving lanes, a 1.5 foot buffer on the north and south, abutting dedicated bicycle lanes. We would have dedicated bike lanes both east and westbound, and there would be no parking through this area. The city mailed letters to every property owner abutting Chestnut Street, East Chestnut Street, in the permitted parking zone. We only received 2 written responses to our request for comment. One writer questioned whether student rentals, where they might have 4 cars in that house, whether they would have ample parking on their site. The other commenter was Miami University, who supports removal of parking and having dedicated bike lanes. In our letter, we advised property owners they could submit comments to the engineering department, or they could attend the meeting tonight and speak personally. I believe we have at least 1 person online whenever you're ready to accept citizen comment.
And Mike, did you include the written comment we got late this afternoon?
I'm
Marianne?
not aware.
Yeah.
I did not receive a written comment.
Okay.
I have it, Doug, and I can share it during public comment.
Good. Thank you.
So our question for this public hearing and ultimately for a resolution is shall this residential permitted parking zone be dissolved so that we can remove parking and install dedicated bike lanes both eastbound and westbound on East Chestnut Street. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right. How about,
excuse me.
How about Ms. Green, if we go ahead and see if any of our online public commenters would like to make a comment now.
Okay, so if you are attending on the Zoom meeting and you'd like to speak, please click the raise hand button. And if you're a call-in user, please click *9. All right, we will begin with Mr. Vince Hand. Okay, Vince, you are now unmuted.
Thank you. I am a Chestnut Street resident, 511 East, so I am in the area affected by this. I've been a longtime advocate for bicycling in the city and have done quite a bit of it myself. I'm also a member of the Parking and Transportation Advisory Board. I have mixed feelings about this proposal, and I'm really here more with questions than I am with any particular request or recommendations, but there are some things that I would like you to consider. One is, as you saw in Mr. Dreisbach's presentation, a priority issue is pedestrians getting across the street particularly from the residents on the south side, and also I believe students and others crossing from the north side to the Silver Nature Preserve. And I would like to hear what council plans to do to deal with this, or what the thoughts are. As to the bike lanes, narrowing the motor vehicle lanes, my understanding is that arguably that's going to reduce speed and encourage cycling on what is de facto the main east-west thoroughfare. It includes now significant semi-truck traffic, and there is a great deal of speeding on the street. So this has been a long time cause for concern of the residents on the street. We do appreciate that the noise will be reduced somewhat by the repaving that was just done. Thank you for that. But there is an ongoing need, and I brought this to council previously, there is an ongoing need to somehow reduce speed on that street. Apparently, you've already received a written comment about what's going to happen, how parking is going to be handled for service vehicles. I know from experience on Spring Street and elsewhere that it's difficult to make exceptions for parking in a bike lane. I also worry a little bit about, probably not that much different from the current situation, but bikes potentially swerving out of the lane to avoid parked vehicles. And we have, as I said, rapid moving, sometimes very large vehicles. My last question for you is, what effect is Miami's new project on Chestnut Street, which I know very little about, but it's going to be revealed to us tomorrow night, what effect that will have on whatever plans the city has for Chestnut Street? I look forward to hearing your answers, and I thank you for having the time to address you.
All right, thank you.
We have one more. Well, Ms. Hoffman, where'd you go? Ms. Hoffman, if you'd like to speak, go ahead, you're unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good. Thank you very much, council and mayor. I'm concerned about the Mile Square being family friendly. And I think that getting rid of the parking on the street would make it less friendly for families. For myself, how can you have people over and entertain if there's no parking? And that would make it absolutely no parking. I just don't think it makes the neighborhood family friendly. Also, I'm pro bike lanes. I think I'm a bicyclist, and I think it's great. At some point, there was talk about there being the bike lane on the north side of the street and widening the sidewalk, which that would address the bike lane, like the Miami sidewalks that have the biking designated lanes. And that way there could still be, I mean, I rarely park someone out on the street, but potentially, what do you do when you have guests? I don't know where all you folks live, but how would that work for you if no one could park near your home? I do use the lot across the street, the Miami lot, and that doesn't seem to be a problem. Hasn't been, but you don't know what the future's going to bring in that respect also. They don't patrol it, or you can get permits from the university, but I don't know if that will continue. So what solution do I have for entertaining? That's really all I have to say. Thank you. And I love the new paved street. It's smooth, quiet. There's not a lot of bouncing up and down from the trucks and the trailers. So thank you for that.
All right.
Ms.
Thank
Hoffman, could you give us your address for the record?
Yes, 709 East Chestnut Street. And this fall, there's going to be students on both sides of me, and they always bring a car for each resident. So that's 4 plus visitors. And I figured they'll park them in the front yards, because what other option do they have? So that doesn't please me either, as a longtime resident of Oxford. Thank you very much for allowing me to make these comments.
Thank you for your comments.
Is there anyone else who would like to raise their hand at this time? I don't see any.
Okay. Then I will open it up to council questions and discussion. Mr. Prithridge?
First off, was there another one you were going to read, Jessica? Was there, or did we get that already?
It was Ms. Hoffman, and she decided to call in, so we're good. Thank you.
All right. Great. I just wanted to thank everyone. I think that this process was kind of a trial run for how we can look at streets. I mean, we had the pedestrian bicycle safety plan in place in the past, and we've wrestled with different streets. We passed the complete streets ordinance that made a commitment to try to engineer and design for all modes according to the best standard best practices in engineering. We created and reinvigorated the Oxford Parking and Transportation Advisory Board with a diverse membership with ties to the Environmental Commission and the Planning Commission. And we had really great collaboration from staff. Mike, it's not lying, we spent 2 hours wrestling over every possible scenario for how best to balance the different competing needs on this street. So I'm sorry, should we close the public hearing first?
We could do that.
I'm thinking procedurally.
We could, why don't we do that? I will just remind everybody who spoke, and it's online, that we have this as a first resolution. So we could go ahead and close public hearings and have this discussion during the resolution. So may I have a motion to adjourn public hearing? Moved by Mr. Prithridge, second by Mr. Snavely. Ms. Eaton, will you call the roll to adjourn public hearing?
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right, at this point, we are up to public comments and public participation. Ms. Green, is there anyone on the line who would like to address council about items not on the agenda?
Those of you who are listening in, if you'd like to speak now on something not on the agenda, please raise your hand, or if you're calling in, please press *9. I don't see any.
Okay. Then we will move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Seconded.
Snavely, by Mr. Prithridge. Are there any items to be removed from the consent agenda? I think we only have one item. Seeing none. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Raghu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right, we will move on to resolutions. Ms. Eaton, will you please read the first resolution when you're ready?
A resolution of City Council dissolving the residential permitted parking zone on East Chestnut Street from Oak Street to Patterson Avenue to allow for the installation of dedicated eastbound and westbound bicycle lanes.
We have a motion to adopt. Motion by Mr. Prithrick, seconds.
Second.
Second by Mr. Snavely. We have, does staff have anything to add?
No, Mr. Mayor, nothing additional.
Thank you, Mr. Dreisbach. All right. Do we have any additional public comments, Ms. Green?
I do not see any at this time.
Thank you.
Can I make a public comment, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Jones. Hi, John Jones, Police Chief for the City of Oxford. I didn't attend the Parking and Transportation Advisory Board meetings, but I was just wondering, maybe it can come up in council discussion and maybe Mr. Prithridge can fill us in. That's that residential parking there. I don't believe there's a lot of it, if I recall, and just anecdotally from driving down there. But I was wondering if the group had addressed church parking on Sunday mornings with Oxford Bible Fellowship, because they do spill over on Chestnut, and they're building a building that's eliminating some of their parking, I believe. So I was wondering, one, if that was addressed, and then two, I'll just reiterate some of the concerns of the public comment of speeding. We've had the issue on McGuffey where we see increased in speeders. So it's a concern. It's not, you just got to balance it with the other concerns, but I just wanted to throw that out before council discussion started. Thank you.
Okay, council discussion. Mr. Prithridge.
So sorry, yeah, I jumped forward before. So this was a new process, and what we tried to do was get input from different staff departments, because this deals with engineering, it deals with planning, and it deals with parking. And I will say that, again, we really wrestled with all of these different values and lots of different scenarios. As I think Mr. Dreisbach noted, the original plan that was developed in 2014 had this as shared use arrows. But I think when we took a look at that, if you were a high schooler riding to Talawanda, would the shared use arrows provide you safe accommodation or not? And I think we felt, given the traffic volume and speeds, it just really wasn't going to be a meaningful impact. We looked at the idea, Ms. Hoffman, I think, talked about the idea of a shared use pathway that would be off street, that I think really has a lot of appeal. But I don't remember what Mr. Dreisbach put a dollar figure on that for those 2 blocks. It's something like $150,000. And it was hard to imagine realistically that when we might be able to do that. And so I think the bicycle lanes was the best, cheapest accommodation. And I think, coming back to Chief Jones's, there is not a lot of parking there. And in fact, as little parking as there is, Mr. Hand kind of communicated that it's not very well used. People don't tend to park on Chestnut because it is high volume. So yeah, I think that we were concerned about the church. I think they have an agreement with Miami and to share some of the lots. And we hope that, I think we're definitely sensitive. If there was a way to maintain the parking, given the standards, we would have found a way to do it. But judging by the standards, and a basic premise was the safety of the user has to be prioritized over the convenience of storage of cars on the streets. And I think, given that this is going to feed it, it's a route to our high school, it'll be a route to our Oxford area trail. It was just a priority corridor with not a lot of alternatives. So in answer to Ms. Hoffman's question, I hope that a relationship between the church and Miami can respond to neighbors for those kind of spillover events when they have extra parking. And I know that Miami Parking is open to that kind of stuff. So I just really want to thank staff, and we wrestled with this. I thank everybody on OpTab. This was not an easy decision to arrive at, but I think this corridor is such an important one.
Mr. Snavely.
Yeah, I was wondering whether if Miami decided to build the extended sidewalk on the north side of Chestnut, whether parking on that side could be revisited, or would it be just prohibitively expensive to restripe at that point?
There would be substantial costs if we had to remove buffer line and the bike lane lines and the yellow paint on the curb for no parking. So I think the cost would be fairly significant.
Councilor Southard.
Yeah, the support of Miami for this was mentioned, I think, by Mr. Dreisbach. And then also Mr. Hand also referred to the university plans on Chestnut. Can anybody fill us in as exactly why the university offered their support and what their plans are and what their commitments are? And also, you know, what agreements might happen, because Ms. Hoffman also pointed out the issue of parking for her guests and so on. Will the university consider making any kind of accommodation? So I'd like to know more about the university's role and what we can make of all that.
Well, I'm not sure what Miami intends to announce tomorrow night, so I'm not able to speak to that. The attractive factor of doing this plan and removing the parking is that these bike lanes going eastbound will connect with the dedicated bike lane on US 27 and will take you to Peffer Park, where you can connect to the Oates Trail. So that's a beautiful thing there. On the north curb, that will connect to Miami's super sidewalk running along Patterson Avenue. So the logistics of this makes sense to do that in this case. The question is, do we remove the parking? And we've had some comment, some concerns about where would my guests go? You know, I think the best thing, you know, I don't know that that's the city's problem to solve. If my driveway can't accommodate my guests, I talk to my neighbors and, hey, can we park a car here overnight? And things usually have a way of working out. So I hope that answers your questions. Was there another question? I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Thank you.
Councilor Ragu.
Yeah, I can understand where Ms. Hoffman is coming from. I'm supportive of this idea as far as making it a safe place for bikes to be. But I mean, on my street on North Locust, their parking is not on one side, but I could see how it'd be really challenging to take the parking away from both sides. I do wonder, especially since Miami is supportive of this, if there is some capacity for Miami to have an agreement too with permanent residents so that they could use that spillover parking. I don't know where Marlene lives in relation to their parking lot, but I don't know if that's something that we could at least try to smooth out the wrinkles to make it so that, I mean, I thank you for living in the Miles Square, you know, like whatever we can do to have people actually want to live there and make it as easy as possible for them.
Right. Councilor Ellerby.
Yeah, so several years ago, we had a very similar discussion regarding McGuffey Drive and having bike lanes on both sides of McGuffey Drive and the residents on McGuffey Drive losing their parking in front of their homes and the ramifications of that. So I've seen what happens when you put bike lanes on both sides of a road, which is causing me concern about this particular instance. Uh, it's my opinion that if we have the south side bike lane there, I'm perfectly okay with that. You know, it connects to the bike lane that goes to Pfeffer Park, so there's an uninterrupted line down that way. The north side of Chestnut, I do have an issue with because of the residents that are there, as well as Miami owns several of those properties, and I would really like to see them continue that super sidewalk around and help us help our own residents with retention, because they should be able to give up that right of way to be able to build that sidewalk and provide that multimodal transportation that's off street in order to preserve the parking for those residents that happen to be there. So, I mean, I would just like to see the north side be unchanged, change the south side, and if time determines that we do need to have that bike lane on the north side, we revisit that. But I don't want to put them both in, realize that it wasn't an efficient decision, and then have to back that back, or, you know, deal with feedback saying that this was a bad decision after already undergoing that expense.
Mr. Dreisbach.
The Parking and Transportation Board and our engineering group did look at that option, and it's not advisable to put one bike lane in one direction and not in the other. It encourages riders to go the wrong way on the existing bike lane, and unfortunately increases traffic crashes because drivers turning through the bike lane are not expecting a bike to be going the wrong direction. So it's not a great practice.
All right. Mr. Ellerby.
Yeah, I totally understand that line of thinking, and that is actually what I expected. However, there is another option, and on the north side, we could put Sharrows and then have the dedicated lane on the south side until time dictates what decision that we should go as far as the north side, while respecting those residents' parking spaces.
Yes, unfortunately, the Ohio Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices does not encourage a dedicated bike lane in one direction and Sharrows in the other. It's just a frowned upon practice.
And it sounds like the decision's been made.
Yeah, unfortunately, we studied many options besides that. We talked about a double lane bikeway in a parking lane, and the risks outweigh the benefits in those cases. So it's the city would have a significant liability if we went on that path.
Ms. Green.
I don't know if you want, but we do have Mr. Hand raising his hand again to speak. Do you want?
Yeah, go ahead and let him ask the question.
Okay, Mr. Hand, you're unmuted.
Thank you. I wondered if I might have the opportunity to respond to some of the points that have been brought up. One is, well, you are suggesting in answer to Ms. Hoffman's question that perhaps there are other places she can find to park, whether that be neighbors or the Miami parking area, which is a block away from her. You still have not answered the question about how service vehicles will be handled, or how that can be accommodated and still be within the law. again, I understood that was a considerable problem on Spring Street. I'd also like to say something about parking. First off, the church parking on Sunday, they seem to be using that less. I would point out that a notice was sent to Pastor Gates as it was to, Pastor Nates, as it was to other residents. And furthermore, I have also been keeping Pastor Nates informed of this and pointed out that there was this meeting tonight and it might affect parking for his congregation. So I think he has had the opportunity to comment. The Miami parking. When Miami put that parking in, there was a spoken but unfortunately not written agreement that there would be no parking after a certain hour of the night. I think it was either 10 or 11 p.m. And that the gate separating their parking lot from the church parking lot would be closed. Now there's a lot of construction going on. But they have not been, at least as far as keeping the gate closed, they have not done that. But it is, I live directly across the street from said parking lot, and it would be unpleasant if there was a lot of parking there at night. Finally, I guess I'd like to, one other thing about Miami. It was mentioned that they have properties on the north side of Chestnut Street, and they are tearing down 2 houses. That is as much as I know about their project. They're tearing down 2 houses on Chestnut Street. This will give them 3 vacant lots in a row adjacent to their parking lot. I'm expecting to hear tomorrow night that they're going to build something, but who can tell? The university has not been very forthcoming with residents of Chestnut Street, but that's a different topic. Finally, at the risk of making too many points here, I do want to talk again about speed on the street. I think that Chief Jones is correct. I think they do a reasonable job of trying to enforce it, but this is not just an enforcement issue because people are going to speed whenever there is not a police car there. Supposedly, the bike lane is to provide some traffic calming, but one of the reasons we have additional traffic on Chestnut Street is because the university has put traffic calming devices on Patterson Avenue and caused traffic to redirect from 27 using Patterson Avenue onto Chestnut Street. So has any consideration been given somewhere in the budget to putting a traffic calming devices on Chestnut Street? This was discussed as early as the 1990s by council. I've suggested a couple of times. I know that budgets are tight, but I don't think you can have both a bike lane and traffic calming devices. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope these points are helpful to you in your deliberations.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hand. Mr. Prithridge.
Can I just ask, I know, Mike participated in the meeting and he heard everything. Vince raised a lot of these issues. And so Mike, what would be one of the issues that Mr. Hand raised was the desire at some point for a rapid flash fired beacon or whatever that is. And also if the city were to decide that, traffic calming devices, how would we do that in upcoming years? I mean, the scope of this conversation was about within the paving budget for this summer, so some of those things were outside of that. But what are some answers to Mr. Hand's question about how we might improve the street in the future for pedestrians specifically?
We do have a placeholder in the CIP that I'm recommending to the city manager for a rapid flash beacon, similar to those that we've installed on Locust Street, similar to the ones installed on Patterson and on State Route 73. So we can offer that. They're solar powered. They're not inexpensive, but I believe it is warranted in this situation. As far as traffic calming, we are reducing the driving lanes to the recommended minimum width of 11 feet, which is required for the buses that go along Chestnut Street. So More narrow streets translates to slower speeds.
I just wanted to confirm with Mr. Dreisbach, when we talk about striping of the bicycle lanes, they will begin at Patterson and go to the west just on the new paving area, or will they extend a little further to the west?
They will go, well, the question tonight is going to Oak Street. So if council votes to dissolve the permitted parking zone, it will go to at least Oak Street. We have two scenarios designed, one to transition at Oak and one to transition in the next block towards campus. We can implement either one of those.
All right, thank you.
So tonight we just need the question answered as to the parking.
Well, I must say I've wrestled with this one. The cooperation between the residents and their permit parking and the church parking on Sundays has to be applauded. The way they work together, that was a win-win. I think as the university moves towards their project on High Street, that's just going to force more traffic onto Chestnut. So I've kind of decided to err with the safety of the bike lanes, at least at the end of the street. You know, in reference to service vehicles, I think if you're getting a refrigerator delivered and they have to park the delivery truck in the bike lane for 20 minutes while they deliver your refrigerator, I don't think that's going to be a problem. You know, if all of a sudden we start to have 300 to 500 bicyclists going down that bike lane a day, we can reevaluate that. I think, you know, the police have been extremely lenient on deliveries in other bike lanes. You know, I see UPS trucks in the bike lanes on Spring Street all the time. So it's going to happen. If I have no further questions, I'm seeing none. Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Prithridge,
And just to clarify, we're accepting the recommendations of OPTAB and voting yes, for example, to dissolve the parking. Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
It's the resolution.
Yes.
Ms. Bregu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. I know that was a tough one. We will move on to our second resolution. Ms. Eaton, will you please read that when you're ready?
A resolution determining the total cost of the assessment by lot, authorizing the list of assessments by lot to be filed with the clerk of council, and ordering the same be open for public inspection, and authorizing the clerk of city council to publish notice in the newspaper of general circulation that the list of assessments by lot is available for public inspection.
Motion to adopt.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Snavely, second.
Seconded.
Second by Councilor Southard. I'll turn this over to Mr. Dreisbach.
Thank you, Your Honor. In February, council voted to approve a resolution of necessity for property owners in targeted areas to improve or repair their curb, gutter, and sidewalk. In March, the city council approved a construction contract for property owners that did not desire to do the work themselves. So this is the third out of four pieces of legislation that's required for a special assessment program. This resolution, through the attached exhibit, makes notice of the actual costs for each parcel involved in the program where the property owners did not repair their curb, gutter, and sidewalk. One thing we're doing differently this year, and thanks to Councilor Snavely for pointing this out, but we're going above and beyond Ohio Revised Code for this assessment procedure. And we're going to take the extra step and mail by US mail a letter to each property owner, specifically telling them what their costs are. In the past, we've simply noticed this in the newspaper, and that met the standard for Ohio Revised Code. We had a couple of citizens that felt we could do a better job and could personally notify them of their actual costs. So we've agreed to do that, and we'll be sending a letter out after you consider and approve this resolution, letting people know what their costs are, letting them know what their options are as far as when they can pay this and avoid any type of a fee. The other issue that I'd like to raise tonight, we had one citizen question the annual percentage rate that is charged for someone to have the special assessment. We've been charging 5% on these programs for as long as I can remember. So, coming up on 20 years, I would guess. In today's year of less expensive money, one property owner thought that was too high. So I'd like to get some feedback from council. We don't need an answer tonight, but when we do the authorizing ordinance, we would need to specify the percentage rate that should be charged for the program. And I don't know if Mr. Newland would like to speak to this, or maybe wait until there's an ordinance, but I just wanted to give council a heads up that was brought into question.
Okay.
We had 45 properties elect for the city to do the work this year. That's a little bit higher than in a typical year. Usually it's around 30 or 35, as I recall. But again, this is the third piece of legislation that's needed, and we'll come back to you later in the year with a ordinance to finalize the assessment. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right. All right, Ms. Green, is there anyone from the public who would like to address this resolution before council?
I do not see any.
All right. We will go to council discussion, and I saw Mr. Snavely's hand up.
Yeah, I just want to thank Mike for responding to the citizen comments. And I think it makes Oxford a friendly town, and it helps citizens plan. And so I really appreciate what you've agreed to do.
Sir, thank you.
All right, Mr. Prithridge.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this is a really methodical procedure, and I appreciate that we do go above and beyond and make it really explicit. We've had some conversation about this because there are a variety of different costs. There's the actual cost, and then there's the permitting fee. And the more transparent we can be with people up front about what they're going to have to do, how much they're going to cost, that really enables them to weigh options and not feel like there are any surprises there at all. I mean, I do think that when we talk about the fee ordinance, we've talked a little bit about, like, is that the right amount of fee that we're charging people? But that'd be that time to do that. And it's a good question about the 5%. So I look forward to having that conversation in the future. I think as long as we're fair with people about what the costs are and it's transparent, then they have some choices. So I appreciate the way we go about it.
All right. And just to clarify for the public who might be lost, we're talking about before we pave the street in front of your house, when we fix the sidewalks and the gutters, and how that gets paid for. So if I have no further questions, seeing none, Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge.
Yeah.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right. We will move on to our third resolution. Ms. Eaton, will you please read that when you're ready?
A resolution authorizing the School Resource Officer Program Memorandum of Understanding between the Talawanda City School District and the City of Oxford, and authorizing the city manager to sign the memorandum of understanding on behalf of the city.
Motion by Mr. Snavely, second. Second by Mr. Prithridge. All right, I'll turn this over to, I guess, start with Chief Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Smith. This is a contract to continue our relationship with the Talawanda School District. We have 3 SROs that work in the district, one at Kramer Elementary, one at the middle school, and then one at the high school. All 3 schools in the city are covered by the Oxford Police Department, and then the 2 schools out in the county are covered by Butler County deputies. So our hope is that school continues on or continues in person, but obviously there's some concerns with COVID that could make this all unnecessary. So, but this was approved at the Talawanda City School Board meeting on July 9th with no opposition. We work really well with the schools. Our officers do a variety of tasks there, such as directing traffic, conducting investigations, monitoring school zones, presenting classes on internet safety and drug prevention, building relationships with kids who in turn then feel comfortable coming up to the officer, and in many cases connecting with the officer who can then connect them with suicide prevention resources or counseling resources. And then ultimately the officers are there to protect the kids should there be a violent threat. And as a parent of 3 kids in this district, I think it's one of the most important jobs that we do here at the police department. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the contract.
All right. Mrs. Green, is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this resolution?
Check. If you'd like to speak, please click the raise hand button or click *9. And I'm not seeing any. Thank you.
All right, we will move on to council discussion. I see Councilor Ragu.
I have some questions. I guess the first one would be on page 94 with the data collection. I mean, this is the same thing as far as the data collection with my normal OPD, not in the schools, but is there any way to also include ethnicity of the student?
Actually, one of the council or one of the board members has requested that before, and we simply give them all the reports, which then reflect the ethnicity of the student or the race of the student involved if there was a student, arrested or involved in that. So we do report all that to them.
Okay, so it's already included in the data?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't create a report that lists out, like I do for PCRC that lists, the number, but I simply provide them all of that, and then they have the data. They get the raw data and can analyze it themselves.
And I'm assuming that raw data had a column that says ethnicity or race? Or is it
Yeah.
just a name and they would have to go and look up what?
No, it in our police reports, it lists the race and ethnicity.
Okay, and then they get a monthly, the superintendent gets a monthly report on it. And that would
Yes.
include, so basically all activities, so not just arrest, but even just talking to a student, I guess, if there was something that didn't end up in an arrest or a citation.
Well, no, I mean, they talk to students, throughout the day. So we don't track every conversation they have with a student. It would be if they created a police report for an incident. So there's really limited, we really try not to get involved in school discipline, and we try to limit the amount of actual charges or criminal charges that we refer people to. So that's where you would see the actual that type of data. But most just conversations with students. Don't create any public, any call for service or incident report.
And I like where the whole school would basically get together and have an agreement on what is considered a violent activity. So that's nice to have consensus. And then on page 90, for the law enforcement role, whenever it says not to get into school discipline, like you said, and then also in consultation with the school administrator. So what does that mean? Like, who qualifies? Would that be any staff?
Typically, our SROs are working with the administrator of the individual building. So that's usually the principal, or in the case of like the high school and middle school, assistant principals. When one of them, is not present, they've typically designated someone to be the administrator of that building for the day. So
Okay.
that's who they work with.
And just as, and I don't know if you're going to have an answer to this, but are there ever situations where the officer felt uncomfortable being asked to do that maybe wasn't agreed upon as part of the violent activities, or that, like, maybe that not that they want to do it, but that a school administrator was asking them to kind of broach on something that would be school-based discipline?
Yeah, that's happened where SROs are asked to do a lot of things by the school and the administrators. And sometimes they have to say, well, that's not really in our purview, and I think that needs to rest with the school. So, but they work well together, and as they learn together as to what our role is versus what the school administrator's role is. So yeah, I mean, that's a challenge for that officer to understand what our limits are in those schools.
And I just want to make sure that SRO feels empowered to be able to say no. And that if that is something that if they are continuously asked, do they report back to you and have?
Yeah, so the SROs all report. Their immediate supervisor is the detective sergeant in our organization. So they are often, if they are being asked to do something that they don't feel comfortable with, they always call him, and he is kind of that extra layer of saying, no, that's not our role. We're not going to do that. So if there's questions, they have plenty of supervision here at the department. If they can't get a hold of him, there's a patrol sergeant, then there's a lieutenant, and then and they could get a hold of me. So I feel like we do a good job of supervising our officers.
All right, Mr. Prithridge.
I guess I would just take this as an opportunity. As counselors know, we've been receiving a lot of communications about policing, obviously, in everything that's been going on in recent months. And we receive a lot of communications that question why so much of our budget is allocated to policing, and if some of those things couldn't be done other ways. And then we have other folks, including 295 people who just submitted a petition signatures supporting the police and all the work that it's doing, including its reforms. And this is one of these classic cases that just shows kind of the conundrum there, which is that once upon a time, there were no school resource officers. We didn't have to dedicate police officers and the vehicles to each one of our schools in our community, because it's not cheap. It's not cheap for us. It's not cheap for Talawanda City Schools. And I think most of us would wish that it weren't necessary. But recent experiences have shown us that it can be necessary, and so it's a tough call. I think that the SRO program has shown, from what I understand, it's been a successful program, but not only because our schools remain safe, but the relationship between the SROs and the schools and the students, it seems like it's been a productive one. But I guess I just use this as an object lesson for the tough choices that we make as a society. We're asking police officers to be in schools all the time, which was not traditionally one of their roles. And so it's an investment that we make, and it's not cheap, but we do it because it's important, and we want an armed officer society. We want an armed officer in the schools. So I thank, and this is just an opportunity to acknowledge that we did receive all that communication, including that petition.
Any other questions tonight? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. All right. That resolution is adopted. We'll move on to our fourth resolution tonight. Ms. Eaton, you may read it whenever you're ready.
Resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a new agreement with National Inspection Corporation for their services as chief building official, plans examiner, inspection, and property maintenance and zoning compliance inspection services for the city of Oxford.
Motion to adopt. Moved by Mr. Savely, second. Second by Counselor Southard. And I will turn this over to Mr. Perry.
Good evening, everyone. This is a contract with National Inspection Corporation that we currently contract with to provide a pretty wide array of services. NIC has been serving the city for many years and has lived through quite a bit of turnover with city staff because of that during that time period. So the last time that there was a contract revision was 2013. And we began looking at some changes after, as I noted in my staff report, there was a part-time zoning inspector position that was created in 2018 that we had for a short time, and that person left. And so we began to look at possibly moving that to National Inspection Corporation. And that's kind of what led to this revision. We weren't able to get that done before COVID, and some other priorities came in the way of getting that finalized. And so through the process of that and going through some software changes, we're bringing all of those revisions to you at one time. So I made a table that you may have seen that listed a few of those changes. I also want to point out that a few of us department heads, specifically Chief Jones and Jessica Green, we have talked about kind of improving the visibility of the value of code enforcement in the community. Not just zoning, but all code enforcement, particularly trash and litter, debris, property maintenance, those kinds of things that do have an economic benefit indirectly and do help promote neighborhood stability. And with a large percentage of absentee ownership, it's important that we keep a close eye on that. And so while through NIC's previous contract, that has been an included service that has been essentially free as part of an agreement to have a fee based for the rental property inspections. We would like to make that more clear that that is valuable to the community by rolling that in with the new role of zoning inspection. So that wouldn't be an increase of compensation specifically for property maintenance, but there would be an expectation that yes, this is something the community values. So that would ebb and flow according to what the season is and the rhythm of the year. Certainly the mowing of grass and keeping those things in order is not something in the wintertime. So those are times of year when other things can be focused on. So that's just kind of a high level overview of what the changes are. We're pleased with the service they're providing. I believe Mr. McKenzie is the president of the company, is online and could answer questions. If you had any specifically, I could probably take them. But we do several hundred permits a year, plan review, the building official service that's provided. And it does take a lot of different trade expertise in the building code, in electrical codes, HVAC codes. And so it's not something we could easily provide in-house. So by having it contracted out, it allows us to take advantage of that economy of scale. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
All right. Ms. Green, is there anyone from the public who would like to address this resolution before council?
I do not see any at this time.
All right, so we will move to council discussion. Mr. Prithridge.
So first is just a technical question. So Sam, can you clarify, when you say plan review, the plan review there would do is in regard to the building code and things like that. So zoning code plan review, the kind of work you do with PUDs and subdivisions, is that included in this contract, or is that still stuff that you or staff would do?
We would still do that within our department. There would not be any zoning code plan review with this contract. It would only be the field aspect of the inspection, primarily for new building footer locations to verify that they're in the location that the approved plan shows. We would continue to co-inspect on final zoning, particularly architecture, landscaping, those kinds of things. So you're correct. It's the building code plan review that will continue to be contracted with NIC as part of this revision.
Okay, great. And the second part is a little bit broader. This makes sense to me in terms of the technical kind of functions that they provide. It's really, but I've been around Oxford long enough to know that once upon a time we had our own code inspector, not just for zoning, for some of the property maintenance things. And I think NIC's done a really good job, but I know that, and so this is really just a point, because it's not so much about zoning. I think that you raised some of the issues of property maintenance and how we might have a more proactive stance on enforcement, and also streamline our enforcement so we don't, how we can get from complaint to resolution quicker, so we can maintain the mile square, for example. So I guess it's not so much a question. I mean, some of that's in-house, and it's really still a complaint-driven process, right? In terms of zoning code violations, someone has to really reach out to the city via I don't remember the name of our system's called. So if a car is, for example, parked in a way that's not according to the zoning, will NIC, are they looking for that kind of stuff, or is it really incumbent upon citizens to complain and enter it in that system?
So zoning code, as far as parking on an unapproved surface, that would be something that would be part of this. But you're right. This is primarily a complaint-driven system, and just because of the manpower and the amount of funding going into it, this is really just an incremental increase in that. So, if this goes well, we could see benefits. We could talk about increasing that in the future. There is a lot of proactive that is done, focusing on really the behavior of the tenants as far as the cleanup of the property. But beyond those kinds of things, there's not much opportunity for that, just because of the volume of inspections that's done. So we also have the issue of enforcement of the administrative ticketing process. We don't have a municipal court. And so if we did want to elevate some of the violations to the property owner, it's hard to collect on those fines. So, not only is there not a lot of funding in our budget for that, there's not a lot of legal support for us to be able to take it to the next step if we need to.
So I guess it's just, I think this is an incremental change that makes sense to me. But I do hope we keep talking about how, because some of the problems we have, probably more property maintenance, are kind of persistent problems that we just have never really been able to get a handle on. And some people would say things have gotten worse. So I hope we can have a conversation at that point, at some point in the future, about how we can make our system as effective as it can be. But that's a different conversation for a different day.
Councilor Raghu.
So just to clarify, Sam, you said that so basically any of the fees for property maintenance would fall on the tenants and not the property owner?
So the way it's been done for many years is, if there is a citation that has a fine, that will go to the tenant.
So if it was a situation, say on move out, if there's trash and litter everywhere and they're already gone, and the trash cans, because they move out on a Sunday and the trash cans are sitting out until Tuesday, that would still fall on the tenant, or would we just look the other way?
So right now there is no citation or code enforcement of that, and that's specifically called on the contract. That's not part of this contract. So we don't have an answer for that. It is a code requirement, but there's no division of the city that focuses on enforcement of that, unless it is blocking a street or an alley. But if it's simply sitting at the curb, there's not a specific resource to handle that.
Okay, because the code says, like, for just the trash can, I'm thinking about that one resident who emailed us maybe a year ago saying that the trash cans are always at the curb and he always has to look at it. Because our code says that it can only be out for 24 hours post trash pickup, but you're saying there's no teeth behind enforcing that, right?
There's no resource. So,
okay.
And there's no teeth. Yeah, both things.
Chantel, are you referencing the business that leaves their can out?
What's the business? Or I can't remember who it was, but I thought he was referring to like a house and the tenants never pulled back their cans.
Yes, on North University near the Millette parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we do have a business that skirts that requirement by paying for pickup every day of the week, but Sunday, because there's no pickup on Sunday. But yeah.
Interesting.
I would just be curious in the future. I mean, especially hearing what Sam's saying about the specific kind of holes in the code, because I know litter is just such a big problem, and trash and move out is just, it was just awful this year because, obviously with COVID and Rumpke couldn't keep up, but it would be really interesting to try to fill in those gaps going forward.
Yeah, we have a desire to do that, and the city manager and I have talked about a way to get at the owner for a responsibility on that moving forward. And there may even need to be some changes in the charter for that to happen. So that's a much bigger issue to discuss, not because it's not important, but just the complexity of amending the charter.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Southard?
Yes.
Mr. Bracken?
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby?
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge?
Yes.
Ms. Ragu?
Yes.
Mr. Snavely?
Yes.
Mayor Smith?
Yes. That resolution is adopted. All right, we will move on to ordinances. We have one first reading tonight. Ms. Eaton, you may read the ordinance whenever you're ready.
An ordinance repealing Oxford Codified Ordinance, Chapter 139, Student Community Relations Commission, Section 139.02, entitled Composition and Appointment, and adopting new Oxford Codified Ordinance, Chapter 139, entitled Student Community Relations Commission, Section 139.02, entitled Composition and Appointment.
All right, I will turn this over to Mr. Perry.
Okay, thank you again, Mayor Smith. This is some changes to the enabling legislation for the SCRC. So this is one of the 5 commissions that my department has a liaison for. Andrew Wilson's the liaison for this one. And this is something that, and I'm sure Councilor Ellerby could add additional light to this. He's on the commission. This one was discussed, I believe it was back in May, just to give some more flexibility so that there's been some department name changes at the university, and by adding the designee, that allowed some flexibility so it just wasn't so rigid. And I think that really summarizes, I mean, I don't want to go through it line by line, but it seemed to make sense to me. I know that Andrew and all the commission supported it. So that's all I have to offer.
All right. Mrs. Green, is there anybody from the public who would like to address this ordinance?
I do not see anyone.
All right, we will move on to council discussion. I see Mr. Ellerby's hand.
Yeah, just to go along with Sam's statement, it very similar to what happened in the work session. It was just a function of we're just trying to get the best composition of individuals, and we felt that a minor restructuring would allow us to accomplish that goal. We just had some this year moving forward, goal setting expectations, and we figured that a couple of changes to affect that composition would help out a lot.
All right. Makes very good sense. This is a first reading, so we will see this back at the first reading first meeting in August for a second reading. We have no second readings tonight, so I will go on to announcements and communications, and I will start with City Manager Elliott.
Okay, I'll just go through a few of them real quickly. I appreciate all of you getting back to me on the date for a follow-up virtual goal setting session. So that'll be August the 3rd, and I'll get out a schedule and some other information for you next week. So thank you for getting back to me promptly on that. The other thing that I want to share with you is that I think you all follow the Butler County Board of Health, and once again, they released their numbers. The updated figure for our zip code is now 67. It was 59 the week before. It represents about 3.4% of all COVID cases in Butler County. It was 3.5% the week before. And once again, that's in our zip code, which is 45056. So the total reported cases in all of Butler County went up from 1,635 to 1,973. So as we all know, it's a concern in Butler County as well as the state that our cases have been going up. And as you all know, Butler County has been declared a level 3 under the governor's public advisory system, health advisory system. In fact, there are now 19 counties in that classification. So, you know, we're not through this yet, as we all know. And of course, I want to thank and congratulate council for pushing forward with the face mask or face covering ordinance. We all feel that that's very important with Miami University students returning. Our goal now is to make sure we educate the public. It seems like we just met yesterday, but it was a week ago, and we've been trying to get the information out to the businesses and the residents. I can tell you with the City Hall, and maybe we have a little leverage here, is that we have signage up on both doors, rather big signage to remind, if you want to come in, you need to wear a mask. And I can tell you that department heads are telling me that everybody's coming in with a mask. So that's a good sign. I think people are getting the message. It's also very important, and I'm happy to note that a lot of the large retailers are requiring it. So hopefully everybody's going to get the message. I mean, as I've said before, our future fate is in our hands. We just all need to wear masks. And like I said, we're going to be focused on continuing the education. I know several of you had sent me a notice about businesses not complying, and I personally called the managers of those businesses and had a good conversation, felt that they all are going to do a good job with that, and the proof will be in the pudding. So, we just need to emphasize that it's not about yourself, it's about the people around you, and that it's so important. We can get a handle on this if we all wear face masks and practice the social distancing and other safe hygiene practices. The last thing I want to put a plug in for our gift cards. We have it, they're available now from practically every small business in Oxford. And so I encourage you to buy some gift cards. I think we've now sold over $10,000 worth. So we're off to a good start, but we have a few more to sell. So if you have vendors that you go to regularly, come on in and buy some gift cards. It's really simple. You can use your credit card and purchase them and use them right away with the businesses. And that's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Jones, anything you'd like to add tonight?
Sure. Tonight, before the council meeting, I had the privilege and honor of swearing in our newest police sergeant. So that's normally something we would do at council, but we did it here in our training room. So Matt Hatfield He's worked with OPD since 2011 in a variety of roles. And so he was sworn in tonight and will replace John Varley as the next police sergeant. So just wanted to let you know that. We've been pretty busy, even though it's summer. Our officers are staying fairly busy. And, you know, as City Manager Elliott alluded to, we've been working to develop procedures on, you know, educating and methods for reporting the face mask and COVID issues and how our own staff responds to it and some of the dynamic issues we're having with it. So officers today were attending racial intelligence training in Middletown. At the same time, myself and other members of command staff and officers attended a lecture by Dr. Rodney Coates on over at the university with MUPD on diversity issues and kind of policing in the current environment and the history of institutional racism. So, you know, we're working hard on that. We're also looking at our complaint process and trying to take all this feedback that we're hearing at council meetings and PCRC meetings and be able to respond. So just letting you know kind of what's going on in the police world.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations to Sergeant Hatfield. Mr. Dreisbach, anything from you tonight?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just a quick update on some of our higher profile capital projects that we're completing. We've been very busy. We try to do as many projects as we can between mid-May and mid-August when students are gone. We are nearing completion of the new water main going under the railroad at Contreras and High Streets. That project's gone very well. We appreciate the public's patience with traffic issues. We had more work than anticipated at Locust Street, but that is wrapping up. They were paving that today. We hope to open Locust Street tomorrow morning. High Street, the east-west leg will still be closed. We have a few details to wrap up. But again, thanks to engineering. They were successful in a 70% grant from Public Works Commission in Ohio. So there's very little local utility money going to that project. We're wrapping up our street construction and resurfacing projects. I must say thanks again to all of our different divisions that work hand in hand to make sure we get a good product and we don't have to tear up a new street, hopefully, because of something that's wrong below ground. So our water distribution, wastewater collection, and street division work hand in hand to make sure if there is a lead service line, water line, that is replaced. And we try to make sure our, in many cases, 100+ year infrastructure is as good as it can be before we resurface a street. The new traffic signal at Chestnut and College is nearing completion. They'll be programming the computers for that and energizing that in the next few days. And I should have mentioned to Mr. Hand, I don't know if he's listening, but that's also a pedestrian safety improvement. It will not only move more traffic more efficiently, but there will also be pedestrian signals at that intersection at College and Chestnut that previously we did not have. And other than that, the Oats Phase 2 multi-use trail is on budget and on schedule. They've begun paving for that. We're about 30% complete on paving, and the bridges are 99% complete. So we expect to be on schedule for a early October opening for that. So thanks again to Jessica for all the groundwork making that project possible. That's all tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Newland, anything tonight from finance?
Yes, I watched the work session, and I just wanted to verify that council wanted me to bring in a supplemental to transfer the money to the Family Resource Center from the Housing Trust Fund.
Yes, I think that is our desire.
Okay. So I'll have that for the next council meeting.
All right.
That's it.
Fantastic. All right. Let's go around. Ms. Green, anything tonight?
Yes, it's good to be back. And Mike, I'm super excited about that trail, so thanks. And just wanted to echo what Doug said about our next steps with the face covering ordinance is really educating both our public and our businesses. So just to expand upon that, we're going to send a mailer out to all businesses with the ordinance so that they, can't say they didn't know about it. We're working with Enjoy Oxford to get signage for all the businesses that they can put on their front doors. That's a little stronger than what's there now. Like right now it says, please wear a mask if you're able. And it's going to be changed to say, wear a mask, it's required. And social distance, it'll be just a little stronger language. And then we're also working with Mike and his team on signage and as people enter town. I saw when we were traveling, we saw one that says, please wear a mask, don't make us ask. And it just was a rotating sign that was on the city sign as you came into town. And I thought that was a really clever way to let everybody know what's expected in that community. So we're exploring those options. And then with that, I'm working with Andrew Wilson on rebuilding kind of phase 2 of our COVID response webpage so that our public knows how we're going to be responding and how we're going to be enforcing the mask ordinance, how we're going to be handling mass gathering concerns, how we're going to handle concerns with bars and restaurants, and try to just share what our plans are, and then also share resources for people, whether that's rent assistance or small business loans or direct to the Restart Ohio pages, things like that, so people can hopefully find it easy in our community. So that's a work in progress. Working with Miami still on the safe return to campus, and our focus is really starting to switch to how are we going to handle and how should we handle house parties. So conversations are happening. So I don't have answers or suggestions yet, but stay tuned. We have formally asked about, are there ways for Miami to include their discipline? And so that question has been asked, and we're working on that. Next is working with NAACP and the Diversity Inclusion Task Force, and they are going to be coming forward with a community forum. And I think Mayor Smith will be invited and the university. So details will be coming on that soon. They want to do it before the students get back. So I imagine that's going to be coming down the pipeline pretty quickly. And then finally, spoke with Doug and other department heads, and we are going to proceed with the Red Brick Friday on July 31st. We've added more seating uptown, and we will be stronger in our language that masks are required, and we'll really try to educate our public. Like if you're coming and you're walking around, you should have a mask on. Otherwise, you should be sitting and eating and enjoying the evening. And then we did get some feedback on the proposed August event that wasn't really a good time to do it when the students are back. And so we are proposing that we move the August 1 to August 7th. It's the last Friday before the DORA closes. And that is what we're proposing to do. And then finally, just wanted to give you a heads up that Mike and Sam and I are working with Butler Regional Transit, trying to come up with a joint RFP for both the Amtrak and their bus platform so that it can be separate but co-coordinated projects. The devil's in the details, but we're trying to work those out with a goal of an end of August announcement if we can get it together. And those are my updates.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Perry, anything you'd like to add tonight?
Thank you. First, I want to show a wonderful new resource. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I don't know if it's backwards or not, but
it's good. It's good. We can see it.
So anyway, I was able to use it this weekend. It's been in the works for many months. So it came out at a good time. The Black History Tour, there's a lot of good resources in town. So I led a small tour this weekend and showed a few sites as part of my hat on the Historic Commission. Also on the Western Knolls authorization that you gave, Doug and Mike and I are hoping to release an RFP the end of next week to the public, and hopefully we'll get some response on that. So we're excited about that. Also, kind of in concert with some of the updates that Mr. Dreisbach gave on public projects, in my weekly report this week, I plan to have an update on about a dozen private sector projects on what the status of those are. that haven't moved forward, just so you have an idea of kind of anticipating some questions on things like Kettering Health, those kinds of projects, the gas station that was approved, those kinds of things, just so you have some rough idea of what's going on with this. So look for that this Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eaton, is there anything you'd like to add tonight?
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Mazur, anything from the law department?
Nothing tonight. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll go around the floor and I'll start with Councilor Ragu.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to just read one of my favorite John Lewis quotes. And I think that, he was always so well known to be a beacon of hope. And his quote from June 2018 says, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So may he rest in peace."
Great. Councilor Ellerby.
Yeah, I would like to say that I've had a lot of good conversations with the constituents in the city of Oxford the past couple of weeks. And I want to reiterate again that if you are a citizen in the city of Oxford and you have a question that you want to ask a counselor, let me know. I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you. And I continue to work on certain things that I believe there are groups that will be happy to see the results of in the future.
All right, thank you. Vice Mayor Snavely.
A couple of things. First, I want to add my congratulations to Sergeant Hatfield. I think that's awesome, and I think he'll do a great job. I was glad to hear the information on the Red Brick Friday being moved. Talking to merchants uptown, one of the messages is that they would rather have parking in front on High Street for their business rather than a crowd of people that were students if it were being held at the end of August. Also, a number of them have talked to me about something that Glenn mentioned at our last meeting, which was a work session with merchants and bar owners and restaurant people uptown. And they're actually kind of interested in it. And it would be nice if we could get that organized before the students come back. So that would be pretty quickly. But there is some interest in participating, at least from some of them that I've talked to. So I'd like to see us move forward on that.
All right. Councilor Southard.
I want to say thanks to everybody for working so hard and encouraging people to wear the masks. We've had a lot of problems, and I appreciate the work that the city staff has been doing to make that happen. And also, I want to, in addition to everything that you do, and projects that you're working on, you're also City Manager Elliott and Assistant City Manager Jessica Green and everybody on staff is very responsive to citizen comments, and I really appreciate that. You are proactive on many projects, but you also react quickly when there are problems or complaints, and I really appreciate that. That makes our job as city councilors a lot easier, so that's appreciated. I also wanted to, in addition to all those things that you're working on, Mr. Dreisbach and Doug Elliott have facilitated the renovation, the repainting of the Jim McWilliams sculpture in the community park. I was out there today. It looks beautiful, and thanks for making that possible. The artist did that sculpture 10 years ago, pointed out that it was necessary to repaint it, and the city facilitated that work. And I think that is another example of very good and proactive work, which I really appreciate. So thank you for that. Enjoy the Oats Trail Phase 1. I'm really looking forward to Phase 2 too. So thank you. And everybody be safe, please, as we continue to deal with the rest of this very difficult summer. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Prithridge.
All right. Just to start off with thinking about things related to COVID, I do think we just need to really put every ounce of energy we can into making this semester successful. As a parent of an incoming student, as a professor, as a city councilor, I'm really at a stage of high anxiety about how things are going to go. And, I imagine that anxiety is coursing through Rowdebush Hall and everywhere else. You can just tell there's still a lot of uncertainty about how this is going to go. So everything we can lean into trying to increase the odds, again, I just think it's worth contemplating what having the students not here this fall is going to be like, or having them come and go. So I really I think the face masks was really an incredible first step. And I really do appreciate Chief Jones. We put something on his plate and it's a new job and it's not a pleasant one. And he relayed some of the anecdotes. I hope that people get on board so we don't make it hard on the police to make it hard on us. But that's a big job and it's only going to get bigger as potentially 20,000 students come back into town. So I think we need to think about what a system's going to be for that so it's manageable. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate city manager communicating to Miami our desire that there be academic penalties for the house parties. But I really do think we need to think about what a policy is, like what's a number that we're going to enforce on and on what circumstances and by what mechanism, because really I'm seeing some students come back into town and the signals I'm getting are there's going to be mixed compliance on this. And so I think we really need to have how are we going to handle this and have it ironclad like in the next week, right, or 10 days. And then the last part on the COVID is the Red Brick Fridays, again, coming back to this idea, how do we go outdoors? I saw some more picnic tables. I think our Dora has been phenomenally successful and is really, the residents love it. I think, as I said last time, we need to figure out how to optimize uptown space. So does that mean closing off some of the side streets on the weekends or something? Let's get creative and fast. So again, thank you. And at least I feel like I've got something to do productive with all my anxiety. A long-term thing is that I did appreciate the conversation tonight about the bike lanes and Chestnut, and I really do appreciate now having the Oxford Parking and Transportation Advisory Board. All of that does point out, however, that we need to think long-term about projects like that. That what we could talk about this year was constrained by the fact that only so much was budgeted for that project. I don't think that widening the sidewalk would have been necessarily a better solution. But if that were to have been on the table, it would have taken having a conversation earlier in the process. So I think that Councilor Bracken's mentioned it. I think that as we go into our budgetary cycle, we've got pretty compressed budgetary cycle. We go bang, bang, we have some meetings, we do the whole CIP in one day. It's not a lot of time to wrestle with the budget that's already kind of baked. And I think always we want to be able to prioritize, but I think as we have diminished revenues, for example, we're going to have to decide which things we can keep and which we can go. And I think we need to build those things into the process. And we need to draw on our boards and commissions to help us with that. So whether we're talking about the HAC and helping us figure out how to help with housing, or whether it's OPTAB looking ahead to streets for next year, so we can, that I think we just need to keep optimizing that process, and I'm going to keep pushing for that. So thank you.
All right. Keep my comments brief. Okay, we got evaluation paperwork out to the counselors for the city manager and the finance director and the law director. Oh, sorry, Jason. Sorry, I almost did it again. Please go ahead.
It's okay. I understand. There's a lot of us. Yeah, I was going to say everything David said. And he added some more there too that I agreed with. I think we really want to address what we can do about COVID. We need to do it soon, and we need to be serious about it. And we have to explore options, especially for outdoors uptown. So I look forward to the work session, but we might need even more than that. And we might need to bring a lot of thoughts and any data we have to that work session in terms of making decisions about potentially expanding DORA into the school year or opening bars up at least outdoors when we can. Options like that need to be considered. I think that's all I have. So.
All right. Okay, so real quick on the evaluations, I'm going to give everybody until, just because I'm going to attempt to take a little bit of vacation, maybe till the middle of next month. If you could get those in a sealed envelope to Mary Ann by the 14th, then we'll start to go through that. I want to make another mask comment tonight. I got a couple of phone complaints from people who have verifiable medical conditions that prohibit them from wearing masks, that were verbally assaulted in businesses in town. So I'm just asking everybody, please be civil. If you see somebody without a mask, unless you know for sure they do not have a medical condition, please do not yell at them or swear at them or threaten them, which has been happening. So please be civil. We're all going to get through this, and we're going to try to be as safe as we can. So on that note, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
Ms. Eaton, will you please call the roll to adjourn?
Mr. Bracken,
Yes.
Mr. Ellerby,
Yes.
Mr. Prithridge,
Yes.
Ms. Ragu,
Yes.
Mr. Snavely,
Yes.
Ms. Southard,
Yes.
Mayor Smith.
Yes. We're adjourned. All right. Thank you all once again. Great meeting.